Good evening, everyone. It is 7 p.m. It is August 27th, 2018. This is the Owen Sound City Council. Looking at the agenda, we did not meet in a closed session prior to tonight, so we're starting right now at 7. Number 4, Council. Well, I'll start with staff. Any additional business, staff? Anything to be added? Go ahead.
Through your worship, I have 2 items, one relating to an information session and the other about the Grey County Compliance Audit Committee.
Good, thank you. Others? Sorry, staff first. I don't see anybody. Okay, Council. Go ahead, Marion.
Thank you, Your Worship. One item regarding AMO and another regarding Big Brothers Big Sisters.
There's 2. And Councillor O'Leary.
Just a quick blurb on AMO.
Okay, anyone else there? Going this way. I'll keep going in direction. Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Worship. Just also a quick update from our visit to AMO.
And Councillor Lemon.
Something which isn't AMO. Sorry, not AMO, but having to do with our heritage and something we can do next year.
Okay, and I'll give a little report on. I've got you written down. Sorry. Go ahead. I wrote you down and then.
Thanks, Your Worship. I have 4 items. One on the Bayshore race, a quick report on AMO, and 2 pieces on the Tom Thompson Art Gallery.
Okay, and Deputy Mayor Wright.
Well, I would report on AMO, but I think by the time you get to me, everything will have been said, so I'll pass. Okay.
Okay, so you got nothing to say. Nothing that you want to say. You're stuck for an answer.
No, I'll just give you an answer, but not on television.
I'll update a few things that I've been doing, although it sounds like everyone's hitting all of them already. Number 5, disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Anybody? Seeing none. Number 6, confirmation of minutes of the council meeting from August 13th.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor O'Leary, that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on August 13, 2018, as printed, be adopted.
All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Number 7, motion to move council.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor O'Leary, that City Council now move into Committee of the Whole to consider public meetings, deputations, and presentations, public question period, matters arising from correspondence, reports of city staff, consent agenda, committee minutes, matters postponed, motions for which notice was previously given, and additional business.
Thank you. All in favor? That is carried. So we are now in Committee of the Whole. Number 8 in our agenda, we have no public meetings. Number 9, we have 2 pretty important deputations and presentations on issues that are current. So I'm starting off at 9A, which is Anne Marie Shaw and Debbie Fry and Sue Seifert. Welcome. Is it working? Yeah, there we go.
Good evening. Good evening, councillors, Mayor Boddy, and staff. I wanted to start off today just giving you a brief overview of some of the homelessness services that are provided by the county and various other agencies within Grey County. First of all, just starting off with a brief overview of Grey County Housing. Grey County Housing has 888 units of housing that is rent geared to income. 500 of those are located in Owen Sound. We also support 10 nonprofits. Those nonprofits provide another 524 units of housing throughout Grey County. We are responsible for the provincial program of the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative and also the investment in affordable housing programs. So throughout the presentation, I'll give you a little bit more of an overview on the homelessness prevention program. The investment in affordable housing program has various programs such as the home ownership, which is a 5% down payment for someone who is looking to buy a home, a rent supplement program, which is $200 or up to $200 in rent money that would go directly to the landlord in order to assist in making the unit more affordable. We have Ontario Renovates that looks at small renos, well, large renos too, I guess, as a roof or a furnace that will allow somebody to stay in their home longer, and secondary suites and rental builds, and that's looking at providing more affordable housing. Over the last couple of years, we have 34 units that are being built in Owen Sound, and we have a request for proposal that is going out next week to build some new affordable units in Durham also. The county has a 10-year housing and homelessness plan. As of 2014, the Housing Services Act mandated that all service managers, Grey County is a service manager, and all service managers in the province had to have a homelessness plan. 2013, we did consultation with people with lived experience with homelessness, with community agencies, and some of our own tenants in the public. We identified 4 areas to sustain and create affordable housing: homelessness prevention, transitional housing, and service coordination. I have handed a handout to you that does have an update on our 2017 report from last year, just giving you basically a summary of some of the services that were provided. We're also going out for a review this fall. As we'll be going into our 5th year next year, we're looking at consultation on how we're doing, what we're doing, and what needs to be changed. We know that affordable housing is an issue in Grey County and right across the province. Higher utility rates, higher rent, and a lower vacancy does make it for challenging to find affordable housing in Grey County. So we know that we've got some things we need to work on, and we want some direction from everybody else. We're certainly, do have a system in place right now, but we know that there's always room for improvement. Under our homelessness prevention program, we have a number of initiatives. We have domiciliary hostels in which we support, Y Emergency Housing Program and Prevention, Safe and Sound, Sustainable Housing Benefit, and the Community Enhancement Program. Domiciliary hostels, we provided last year in 2017 $600,000. There are 5 domiciliary hostels within Grey County, 3 in Owen Sound, and they provide beds to people that may need a little bit of an assistance in maintaining and sustaining their housing. There are 125 beds in Grey County. 92 of those beds are funded by Grey County itself, and the remaining are funded by Hope Grey Bruce. There are 11 beds currently available right now in Grey County for those support services. Some of the services that residents might have would be medication management, laundry services, assistance with daily activities, nutritious meals and snacks, and assistance with transportation and appointments. Grey County is involved with those 5 providers, and also do look at the various things that need to be done in order to maintain their services. So we would look at insurance, fire, health and safety, capital, funding, staffing, making sure that staffing have the correct qualifications and that they're the correct amount of staff on site. Emergency housing, Grey County does fund the Y to provide emergency housing program and a homelessness prevention program, and Sue Seifert is here from the Y, so she'll provide some information and details on those programs. We also assist Safe and Sound. It's a storefront for meals and laundry and supplies. There is some transitional housing available there, and they also provide after-hours emergency services. So, for instance, when the Y is not open, then there is a contact line for someone after hours if they do need assistance with emergency housing. There's the sustainable housing benefit. So the sustainable housing benefit is a fund that we provide to residents of Grey County in which may help them sustain or maintain their housing. For instance, they may have fallen behind in utility arrears. Utility costs have been going up over the last few years, so sometimes not easy to maintain on a lower income. There might be some rental arrears or last month's rent, especially if they're looking for something that's a little bit more sustainable or affordable. This will allow them to have that sort of heads up, because at first and last month's rent are due at the same time, so that's often very difficult for someone to come up with. So that is available through Grey County. Last year we assisted 713 households at a cost of $457,000. We also have a community enhancement program, and these funds are built to assist community organizations to provide services. So we're looking at those grassroots organizations, those that are in our community, maybe your Beaver Valley Outreach, or looking at maybe OSHARE. So these are examples of communities that may provide assistance with meals, hot meal, transportation, clothing, or other programs. And so these are just small grants in which we provide on an annual basis for those that apply, so that there are more services out there and more services that people are able to access. So that's it for my portion. Now we're on to the why. Sue Seifert.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am the Manager of Community and Employment Services for the YMCA of Owen Sound Grey Bruce, and I'm here tonight to talk specifically about our housing program and specifically services to individuals who are homeless and requiring emergency shelter. So the YMCA, we meet one-on-one with individuals to help find affordable, appropriate, and accessible long-term housing. We meet or work with youth who are 16 plus as well as with adults. And we also work with countless organizations and services across the area to assist with support for health, finances, and well-being that enable the individual to be able to retain housing once it's found. So how do we do that? We start out by assessing the vulnerability of the individual. So if, for example, they found themselves homeless because they're a victim of domestic abuse, then we would connect with the women's shelter. Perhaps they've been released from hospital, in which case what services are available, perhaps VON. Is there a need in that case for accessible housing because of a wheelchair or a walker, that kind of thing. We also look at what the situation is. Does the individual have any available funds? Do they have connections, family or friends perhaps, with whom they could stay? Sometimes if we're able to provide them with a gift card for a local grocery store, that might help a family or friend being willing to put them up on a short-term basis because they can help with groceries while they stay with them. We also look at, is this their home community? If it's not their home community, then is there a community elsewhere where perhaps they have some supports? Is there a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle who would be able to help them or provide them with some support? And ongoing support. Sometimes in that case we will help by providing a taxi to take them to the other community, or perhaps we can provide a gas card which will allow the individual to come to Owen Sound to pick them up. Every situation, every story is different, and our job is to determine what works for that individual at this time. So once we've explored other options, and if they are not available, then we will arrange for the individual to stay at a local hotel or a bed and breakfast as a short-term plan. We also work with Safe and Sound, which is a nonprofit organization who is staffed by volunteers. They answer the phone from 4:30 until 10, 7 days a week. And they also can arrange to put somebody up at a bed and breakfast or a hotel. And they instruct the individual to come and contact us on the next business day. So once temporary shelter is arranged, then our focus becomes to work on more secure housing. Our aim is to help individuals move from homelessness with a housing plan within 5 days. But 5 days is a benchmark. We do that because so that the individual knows that emergency shelter is intended as a short-term option while a longer-term solution is being worked on. Knowing that emergency shelter is time limited does encourage them to keep moving forward and to be part of the plan. While they're sheltered, our staff will set regular daily, sometimes more than daily, appointments to work together. And the individual will be asked to do their part. They may be given tasks to do to help us to find housing. Those things might be talking to a friend to see if they know of an available unit. Maybe there's somebody who's looking for a roommate. Check the newspapers to see what's available. Perhaps they need to talk to their Ontario Works caseworker to determine what resources are available there. Setting a budget or working on a budget so that they know what they can afford. As I mentioned, 5 days is a benchmark. It is not a rule. If someone's working or following through and working on their housing plan, but the situation maybe is complex, or if they're particularly vulnerable, then we can extend the stay. That often happens if the person needs specialized housing, for example, if it needs to be accessible. Perhaps they're waiting on a unit that they've secured. So maybe they can move into their place on the 1st of the next month, but that's 10 days away. We can continue to house them. Maybe they're working with another organization and are working on some goals. Maybe they're a victim of human trafficking or family violence, and perhaps they're waiting for a paycheck or other finances. Those are situations when we would look at housing them for longer than 5 days. While we work out a plan, we do provide space and access to telephones so that they can contact landlords. In some cases, we will actually contact landlords on their behalf. In almost every case, we do help them to apply to county housing so that they can get on the waiting list. And sometimes individuals are not bound to Owen Sound and they're willing to go anywhere else or anywhere, in which case county housing may be available much more quickly in some of the outlying communities. In other cases, that's not an option because the individual requires the services that are only available in Owen Sound, perhaps public transportation, medical treatment, that kind of thing. Sometimes, because of a reputation of poor tenant history, finding housing for an individual is a challenge. Sometimes we can come up with one or maybe two options for the individual. Neither one of those options or maybe their preference. However, they might have to take one of those options on the short term. They can continue to explore other options while they have secured housing. As part of the plan, we do connect with other organizations or services as appropriate. That might be mental health, medical, addiction services, any wraparound services to support them and to help them better be able to retain that housing once they found it. Again, every situation, every story is different. In each case, we want the individual to be part of the plan. Challenges we face continually are finding affordable housing, finding units that will house a family, finding accessible units, finding assisted living spaces for individuals with low income, and finding landlords who are willing to give a chance to someone with a poor tenant history, or is on Ontario Works, or a youth, or maybe has pets. So far in 2018, that didn't come out really well. So far in 2018 in Owen Sound, we have provided 578 nights of emergency shelter to 172 people. And those stays have ranged from 1 night to 18 plus. I think we housed one individual for 21 nights. But overall, the average number of stays per person is 3.3 nights. And just as reference, how that compares to the overall County of Grey, in the same time up till now in 2018, 929 nights have been provided to 272 people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Debbie Fry. I'm from Hope Grey Bruce Mental Health and Addictions. Thank you for inviting us tonight to share our services and supports. Just a brief caveat, as some of you may or may not know, Hope Grey Bruce will be amalgamating with GB House and CMHA. As of September 1st, the new organization will be called CMHA Grey Bruce with the tagline Mental Health and Addictions. Having said that, that won't change any of our services, phone numbers or anything. That will be all the same. So the pamphlets that have been distributed will be current in terms of the services and supports that we receive. So in terms of supportive housing and outreach, we offer supports to those living with a serious mental illness and addictions. Our housing menu includes all kinds of things. We have addiction supportive housing. We have an apartment program and residential program as well. So how do you get to us and how do you get to these housing options? That's a quick example of an application referral. We have reduced it so that it's easy to read, it's not cumbersome, and that people who are accessing the services don't find it too overwhelming. Self-referrals are accepted, so somebody coming off the street that doesn't have a place to live can come into our office, Community Connections. There they can meet with our intake staff. They will go through a little bit more in terms of what they're looking for. Because our mandate is serious mental illness, we do a little bit of work around the background and what that means, and then customize what they would like in terms of their housing options. So we have tools that we use that determine the wants and needs of the individuals that are seeking housing. One of the key components of our housing support is our outreach. And so outreach is offered while people are on the wait list. We do have a long wait list, but if somebody is really struggling and needing some case management, we offer that while they're waiting on the list. So there is always that. In addition, we have a group services that for those that are still looking for housing and they have nothing to do during the day, they can certainly participate in the day activities that we offer. We do connect with other community partners such as Grey County and the Y quite frequently. And that seems to be a very strong hold for the outreach sense of work. A lot of the community partnerships and liaising and proper referrals is done in our case management function. Vacancies are filled based on vulnerability and the time on the wait list. So if you were on the wait list for a long time and somebody was homeless, they would jump up to the top. We do have priority ranking tools that the intake team are trained on and are used frequently. So types of supportive housing that's offered is we have a short-term housing, which is less than 45 days. So somebody that might access that might be somebody who's maybe gotten involved in the judicial system and is needing some time to figure out where they want to go. So we do offer that. Again, all of our housing is with support. So that means with staff, outreach staff that are trained in mental health and addictions. Our temporary housing, which is less than 364 days. Our addiction supportive housing is 364 days. So those are folks that are struggling with addiction issues and needing some stable, affordable, safe housing to figure out where they need to go and develop their customized plans moving forward. Our long-term housing could be our group homes. Some of the folks there have been there for a while. Now, again, it would be depending on the need of the people. Our apartment programs, as long as people are in the long-term housing and require that support, they can remain. Many folks decide that at some point they don't need the support any longer and may move on to getting onto the list of Grey County or move to market rent. Some of the really good stories for some of our folks that have gone into our long-term housing is after a long time of stability, people have been able to secure employment and move forward with getting out of our services and no longer needing our supports and accessing the community on their own. And so as they move on, then we have more room for those that do need that actual support. In terms of our housing spaces, so we have 59 shared living spaces, so that's kind of a congregate group living spaces. 100 private market apartments, and again, that's not just here in Owen Sound, that's across Grey and Bruce. All of our outreach folks do travel within Grey Bruce, from the shoreline to all over the place. They're traveling the highways and byways all the way up to Tobermory, and providing that in-house apartment support for folks. I mentioned the addiction supportive housing. That's a relatively new program for us. We do have our addiction supports. We have addiction counselors that work in tandem with outreach. So if somebody is struggling and needing some extra work, they will work with the addiction support worker. Again, the outreach people do go into the apartments and make sure that folks are doing okay, and that the rents are getting paid on time, and everything is going well. We do offer a rent subsidy program in partnership with Bruce and Grey. Our outreach support, as I mentioned before, is one of the crux of what it is that we offer. We've got an active waiting list, and why I say active is that understanding that there's lots of needs for housing out there, that we try our very, very best to develop customized, really creative ideas around those that are waiting on the list and needing some housing. So again, we do offer Metro cards, food cards, those types of things to help people stay if they're hanging out with their buddies, and keep them housed for a little bit. We do offer motel, short stays at motels as well. And for those that are struggling physically or mentally with their health, we do offer cab rides to the hospital, emerge departments, and those types of things to seek their medical advice. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Councillors, questions? Or is there someone else coming up? I guess I should, I'm jumping to conclusions here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. And thank you so much for your presentation and enlightening all of us on the services that are available. Question I had, I didn't hear anyone mentioning OSHARE or Salvation Army Food Bank. Can somebody tell me your connections with those?
So we do provide some funding through our community enhancement grant, and it is a small grant to OSHARE. I think that it's what we do is make referrals. A lot of the funds are done through fundraising and come from other sources other than a county source, but it's certainly something that we support as needed, and definitely provide referrals for people to use the services. I think all of us provide those. And the Salvation Army, so yeah, the Salvation Army is not funded through the county either. It would be funded through another source. But again, definitely working within the communities with Salvation Army and those referrals.
Others? Do you want? No? Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much, Anne Marie. So what I'm hearing and what I've heard and what I know from being on the county, there's no need for anyone to go homeless, to go without a bed at night.
We try our best, that's for certain. There are services available through emergency services for someone too. The Y does have that availability. So yes, there are options. There are always people that maybe we don't reach, but we certainly, if try and get the word out that if somebody does need assistance, to contact the Y or contact that after hours line.
And there are some people that just simply don't want to go somewhere to sleep.
And that's fine too. If they don't want to, then when they do decide they want to, for instance, if it's getting cold or circumstances change, then we're certainly there to provide that service.
Right. Now, also, sitting on the Owen Sound Housing Board, how many people are on the list looking for housing?
For Owen Sound?
For Owen Sound.
We have approximately probably over about 400 people that are looking for housing in Owen Sound on our wait list. I'm always hesitant to give a number just because circumstances change. We know that sometimes we have seniors that might go on the list thinking that they might need it in a few years. And we do have a number of people that come from out of Grey County that are on our wait list too. But certainly there is a need for affordable housing.
And at this time, the Owen Sound Housing is applying for permission for 8 new units.
That's right, 8
Right.
new units, and I know have site plan for up to 90 units on there. So again, working with the province and federal governments and waiting to see what some of those new funds might be coming down that we can use to build more affordable housing, and looking at other opportunities too. We're also looking at some options with our Westmount family units too.
Well, I think that the county's 10-year housing plan is certainly the step in the right direction, that plan is, and it's a good plan, and I'm quite sure when we're all working together, we can make it happen.
Others? Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I'm sorry, this will be actually through you to the Director of Community Services. Sorry, thank you. Pam,
I'll have one before you leave, Anne Marie, just if you want to hold on. Go ahead.
Pam, I apologize for putting you on the spot here because I didn't give you a heads up, but the CIP plan, we have our community improvement plan, and in that, do we not address affordable housing options as well that could be for a developer who is planning to build affordable housing?
Through you, Your Worship, there is an affordable housing loan program in our CIP. It isn't one that the city has funded traditionally because you've chosen to support this type of housing in other ways through the county, through Owen Sound Municipal Nonprofit, and other means.
Thank you.
So we were all at the AMO conference last weekend, and there's one session that everybody's in the room, and there's dozens of cabinet ministers. Questions came up about mental health, questions came up about homelessness, questions came up about opiates, and it was clear that all of those are very much on the provincial government's radar, but they're 6 weeks old, so who knows where they're going. Do you have any feeling or any idea of indication of what funding is available, is going to be available, that we can access up here for affordable housing and some of those other issues?
So we have traditionally been working with the province through the Investment in Affordable Housing program. We have funds up until next year for that program, and those right now are being tied to the request for proposal for the Durham property that I had mentioned earlier. We're hoping that they will continue on the same path of providing affordable housing funds. It's very hard with a smaller tax base to provide a large supply of affordable housing, so the need for the province and the federal government, it has to be there. If the system doesn't work, if there isn't commitment from all 3 levels of government. We were very happy just to, in the last year, that there's been a national housing strategy announced too. There is some co-investment funds available. We are looking into that. It's more looking at loans rather than grants for building housing, but there might be some options there for some local private builders that might be interested in, even if they're building 50 units and they want to make 2 affordable. It's a great way to start that conversation about affordable housing. We are hoping by this fall after the 100-day review, to maybe have some more answers from the present provincial government.
Great, thank you. That lead to any other questions? Anyone? No, so I want to thank all 3 of you, and I see Kim Wingrove back there, and everyone, Francesca, everyone that's come to present to us tonight. Give us that information. Often staff know about that information, and it kind of slips through our filter, and we get asked questions, and we don't know the answer quickly enough. So it's great to have you present to us tonight, and being on Rogers Cable, that the citizens get to hear it and understand it. And so thank you very much for your presentation. So the next deputation is from John Slocum, GM Blue Plan Engineering, with regard to the 10th Street Bridge replacement.
Your Worship, members of council, John Slocum, I'm a project manager with GM Blue Plan in Owen Sound here. And with me is Brett Willis. He's our senior structural engineer, helping out the team with a project here looking at replacing the 10th Street Bridge. Much of what I'm going to present to you today is what was presented at our Public Information Center in July, and we received some comments back from that presentation, which I'll share with you, and then I'd like to go over some of the next steps as well. Just the basic agenda for what I wanted to cover tonight. It's an overview of the municipal class environmental assessment process. It's part of the planning process. Get rid of that thing. Part of the planning process that's covered under the Environmental Assessment Act tells us how to properly go through and plan municipal projects. I want to give a recap of Phase 2, which was the decision to move forward with replacing the bridge. Phase 3 of this process is evaluating alternative design concepts, which is the meat of what I'm intending on presenting. An overview of the comments we received, recommended design concepts for Council's consideration, and the next steps. This little convoluted graph is basically an outline of the municipal class environmental assessment process. It's a 5-phase process from problem identification in Phase 1. Phase 2 is identifying alternative solutions to the identified problem. Phase 3 is where we are now in terms of looking at what the design concepts might be. And Phase 4 is basically documentation of the process. And Phase 5 is moving to design and construction. Just a quick recap, a little while ago we went through this process with Council looking at the project statement. Basically the bridge is deteriorating at an advanced rate and it needs to be addressed, and we looked at basically 3 options: do nothing, rehabilitate, or replace the bridge. And with that review, Council authorized the decision to move forward with replacement. So with the decision to move forward with replacement, we're looking at alternative design concepts now. And there are 7 such considerations or design concepts that we decided were important to consider. Traffic management during construction, the number of traffic lanes and the configuration on a new bridge, pedestrian and bicycle movements, bridge style, construction efficiencies to save time during construction, municipal services and public utilities that might be impacted, and construction implementation, how the whole project might work. So design concept number 1 is probably the most asked question: what are we going to do with traffic during construction? And to kind of get a sense of the issue, there's somewhere between 20 and 30,000 vehicles a day that use the bridge, depending on when they're counted and how they're counted, and peak and seasonal fluctuations come into play. But it's a significant number of vehicles per day that do use this bridge. To consider this, we looked at the feasibility of 4 different options. One is do nothing, just allow traffic to find its way through other routes. Maintain lanes on 10th Street Bridge during construction was an option we considered. Construction of an additional temporary bridge as another adding capacity to the system, or optimizing existing routes through the downtown core. So just as a benchmark, we looked at the do-nothing option, and basically the traffic planning consultant that we've asked to model some of the traffic flows suggested that all the intersections would experience significant delays and congestion, queuing. The congestion would be well beyond the core area itself, and the impact on local businesses would probably be significant enough. I don't think that's really surprised anyone, so that one wasn't basically supported. The second option is it feasible to maintain lanes on the bridge during construction. When we looked at this, there were several considerations. One is that to do that, you basically cut the bridge in half. You remove one half, build a new bridge, and then take the other half apart. That process adds considerable time, considerable cost. There's a lot of safety concerns associated with that type of operation, because you're having the public introduced to an area of very heavy construction activity. So safety is a concern for not just the workers, but the driving public as well. And the overall viability, it wouldn't actually address the overall capacity issues. There would have to be significant other improvements to the remaining roads in the system to make that at all viable. So overall, that idea was not supported. The third option we looked at was providing another bridge to add capacity to the system while the 10th Street bridge was out of service. Part of what we were looking at is, crossing south of 10th Street were really not very available, very limited opportunities south of 10th Street. We looked at several other crossing locations and what that might involve. But basically, the background studies that were prepared prior to our involvement, there's a transportation master plan that the city has in place, and a recent corridor optimization study. And both of those studies concluded that an additional crossing north of 10th Street, a permanent one, wasn't warranted at this time. And so with that in mind, and the fact that building a temporary bridge would be almost as expensive, if not more expensive, than building a permanent bridge for various reasons. One being the soils in the area are very poor, and you'd have to build proper foundations to support even a temporary bridge. And those costs of building a foundation are quite significant. And so to build a temporary bridge on significant foundations, just to take it out again, didn't seem really appropriate. There's financing issues. The city has obviously got to find sufficient finances to build their portion of the bridge, but all the servicing and the roads related to that project, and other projects that will be needed to support this replacement project. MTO certainly has provided financial support for this project, $3.5 million, I believe, towards the project. And the county is a potential other partner. Other issues would be the lands north of 10th Street are federal government lands as part of the harbor system, not owned by the city or not under control of the city. And the funding approval timelines with the MTO grant, it's valid until March 2021, which means the bridge has to be substantially completed by, say, December 2020. It gives us about a year to design, get approvals in place, and build the bridge, because we'd be working through 2020. So ultimately, considering another bridge north of 10th Street wasn't really supported through this process in terms of a traffic management option at this time. So the next, what you're left with, I guess, after going through that process is how do we optimize the existing routes? What can be done with the remaining crossings at 9th Street and 8th Street and the rest of the road system to manage traffic through the downtown area? Some of the tools we have in our toolbox to accomplish this are listed in the bullet points. Conversion of some of the streets to one-way, for example. Some lane reassignments, meaning you can have traffic flowing in different directions at different times, perhaps. The addition of turning lanes at intersections to help relieve some of the pressure on the intersections. Similarly to turning restrictions, say avoiding left turn lanes is always a good way of helping traffic to move through a system. Some traffic signal timing changes, traffic signal additions in some cases, and even the consideration of removing on-street parking in certain circumstances. And certainly the use of the bypass through Springmount to Rockford has been considered. Certainly the idea would be downtown is open for business, but if your intention is a through move, there might be an opportunity to go around rather than through. So of the alternatives we considered so far with optimizing the existing routes, we've looked at several already with our traffic planning consultant. And so far we've come up with 3 that provide what we consider so far to be a reasonable level of service. And we're going to pull them forward, do a little more detailed analysis on that as we go through the design phase of the project. Certain things in the cost-benefit analysis might include, does it actually solve the problem, or to what degree does it solve the problem? What are the costs associated with it? You know, how many more intersections, how much more work needs to be done for physical improvements to accommodate that? Certain practicality of implementation. So a driving public is often used to a certain way of getting through town. If you turn a street into one-way only, what confusion does that cause? Is that, how big of a concern might that be? Removal of on-street parking certainly can create a traveling lane by removing on-street parking, but on the other hand, some of the downtown businesses certainly appreciate having the parking available on the street front. So those types of things will be considered through that process. And other things, again, such as some of the streets in the system in the core area have more residential flavor to it, and we prefer not to increase traffic significantly on those residential streets. So these are all considerations that we will work through in coming up with a detailed plan for traffic movement through the core. But ultimately, we have a couple of ideas here that we are given some idea, some sense that they will be reasonable to work. So in terms of this design concept, traffic management during construction, we are recommending that we work with this idea of optimizing existing routes and come up with a best fit plan for the system as is. The next design concept we considered was the traffic lane configuration. The existing bridge has 5 lanes, as everyone knows. There's 2 eastbound lanes, 2 westbound lanes, and what they call a westbound turning lane on the north side of the bridge. This recent corridor optimization study recommended a 5-lane bridge similar to the existing, similarly with 2 eastbound lanes, 2 westbound lanes, and somewhat widened westbound turning lane. The way that existing lane was created was the original sidewalk was removed from the existing bridge, and so that's all there was room for to accommodate this lane. So it's really quite narrow in terms of design standard. A new bridge would be somewhat wider to accommodate a proper design width for that turning lane. That is and that's the preferred configuration one we're recommending. The next design concept is looking at pedestrian and bicycle movements. How do we accommodate pedestrians and cyclists through this system? We broke it down into 3 basic movements: east-west movements across the bridge itself, north and south movements, and then third would be the multi-use trail system. For the east-west movements on the south side of the bridge, currently there's about 3 meters available to fit in a sidewalk. The design would be 1.5 meter wide sidewalk, a meter wide boulevard, and a railing basically fills up your 3 meters. There may be opportunities to widen that. We'll be looking at through the design process, but basically that's really all that's available in the 20 meter right-of-way that's available to us, and that would keep the southerly lane alignment with the way the rest of 10th Street is lined up. On the north side of the bridge, again, we looked at that in a couple of different ways. We considered that there's an urban pedestrian movement, we'll say, between the commercial districts on the east side and the west side, and there's also the Inner Harbor multi-purpose trail system, which also uses the north side of the bridge. We thought a couple of options there might be separating those uses or combining those uses. A little bit into that. Firstly, we looked at keeping those urban and trail uses somewhat separate, if I can get this working. This depicts here a separated sidewalk. So this would be First Avenue East, across the bridge to First Avenue West, connecting to the sidewalk in front of the Shoppers Drug Mart. So the idea would be that would be a separated sidewalk. A design like that would include probably a 1.5 meter wide sidewalk. You'd have to have boulevards on each side, curbs on each side, and bollards to prevent traffic from crossing over. That would be a dedicated pedestrian route. So it would basically end up physically separating this turning lane from the through lanes. There would be this move now where the southbound on First Avenue East goes to westbound on 10th Street would be eliminated, and so would the through move to northbound on First Avenue West. This First Avenue West would ultimately have to become one-way because access through the sidewalk here would not be permitted. So there are a few things that don't weren't really supported for that option. A couple of extra signals also would have to be put in place to allow pedestrians safe crossings of the U-turn. So the next one we looked at was basically combining the urban and trail uses, which is very similar to the way it's structured now. The bridge width would be minimized, be fewer pedestrian conflicts compared to the previous option. Visibility, I think anyone who uses that bridge knows about the visibility issues here at First Avenue West and the difficulty seeing beyond the building here at First Avenue East. We have some design solutions that will help to address those visibility issues. And it maintains the westbound right turn merge, and the southbound left turn, so this crossover would still be able to happen, and maintains two-way traffic on First Avenue West. So ultimately, that option basically is very similar to status quo was supported through the process so far. North and south movements. So on the east side, we'll start with the easier one. On the east side, there are traffic signals already at 2nd Avenue East, and they're in very, very close proximity to the bridge. It's not very far to get from 1st Avenue East to 2nd Avenue East. The crossing is there. It's quite easy to navigate. Trying to put another crossing location in at 1st Avenue East would need another set of signals, which would interrupt traffic flows. So just suggest maintaining the pedestrian crossing at 2nd Avenue East at the lights as it exists now. On the west side, some of the things that are of interest on the west side, there's a multi-purpose trail connection along the west side of the harbor to, as we're calling it, the River Precinct Trail project that's being advanced through the process also. Right now, that would cross 4 through lanes and 1 turning lane. And the traffic studies that we completed today recommended that those traffic signals remain at 1st Avenue West in order to maintain the southbound left turns. Otherwise, without those signals, all the southbound left turns would be moved over to 2nd Avenue West, and the analysis said that would overload that intersection. So in order to accommodate pedestrian and bicycle movements, we looked at 3 different options on that west side. First one was a pedestrian underpass. Second would be an at-grade crossing, which is similar to the existing condition, and then a pedestrian overpass. This little graphic basically just shows the summary of the different elements we considered in coming up with a recommendation. Separation of the vehicles from the pedestrian traffic is obviously a good thing to do. An underpass and an overpass would achieve that, whereas an at-grade obviously would not. Removing the traffic signals at 1st Avenue West was initially considered to be a good idea. However, the traffic studies don't support that. Again, saying that it would overload 2nd Avenue West. Maintenance of the multipurpose trail connection, certainly all 3 of these would accommodate that. Security was something we considered. An underpass may have some challenges with policing, being out of sight and somewhat out of mind. At-grade crossing is clearly visible, and an overpass is somewhat neutral. It's quite easy to see, obviously. Certain accessibility requirements have to be considered as well. An underpass and an overpass require fairly long approach ramps to achieve the grades that would be necessary. So there'd be considerably more construction out beyond the bridge itself to fit in adequate ramps, whereas an at-grade crossing is already at the grade that's necessary. Certain technical issues, vertical clearances between the underside of the girder, for example, and the water level. There's insufficient room at 10th Street to accommodate the vertical clearances that would be necessary for pedestrians and cyclists. Clearly not an issue in that grade crossing, and an overpass it needs a minimum of 5 meters above the road surface so transport trucks, etc., can get in underneath an overpass. And of course, cost. An at-grade crossing, considering the signals are already required to be there in the first place, it's relatively low compared to the other 2. So with this analysis, overall, we're recommending that an at-grade crossing be included in the design. The next concept we considered was the type of bridge, the bridge style, and different bridge styles are generally related to materials, the type of construction methods, and the geometry. We've looked at concrete and steel materials, cast in place versus precast construction, and geometry. So it's some considerations for different styles of bridges. But generally, for spans less than 30 meters, such as we have here, bridge supported from below rather than one above is more appropriate. And again, with those considerations, this graphic again shows the considerations we went through in terms of relative cost, quality, construction efficiency, appearance, natural environment. And through that evaluation, we've considered that a precast concrete girder bridge, very similar to the Ninth Street Bridge, for example, is what we are recommending for a bridge style. The fifth design concept we considered was construction efficiency. Certainly we don't want to take any longer to get this done, and no one else wants to see it take any longer than it needs to. Different things we have to consider, though, through this process. The amount of time is one thing, but also the quality and the cost. Sometimes you can't get all three at the same time. So there's certain things we wanted to consider in terms of making the bridge construction process as efficient as possible. Precast components is one way of making a bridge construction project go more quickly. They can be precast off-site in a factory and brought into use. However, there are certain elements of the bridge construction that really don't lend themselves to precast construction. So, for example, the concrete foundations, there's piles have to be driven down to bedrock. There's really no easy way to do that. I think we're familiar with the Sydenham condo construction. How they drove piles for that. Ninth Street Bridge is on piles. Pretty well every bridge in Owen Sound is on piles. Any large building is on piles. We're well aware of the poor soils that exist in the downtown area. We have a drill rig on site this week, was there Friday, I believe. So they're looking for solid rock on which to support this bridge, and it's about 30 or 40 meters down. So there's no precast, no easy way of doing that, unfortunately. Pile caps, after the piles are driven, they're steel tubes basically driven down to rock. Once those are in place, a poured in place pile cap is put on top of them as a solid leveling pad. It's really not an easy way of precasting that, because the piles end up slightly different from your design plan depending on how they're driven in and what they hit along the way. So cast in place is the way to go. So not supported for precasting that application. Concrete abutments, we looked at. The abutments are the vertical walls that hold back the soil behind the bridge. We considered precasting those. Again, they would have to come in very large pieces, which would be incredibly difficult to transport from the factory where they're made to the job site. Very difficult to swing into place, very difficult to erect, and also they're very critical components in your bridge moving forward, and they would have cold joints between each of the pieces, and those are the areas where water and salt can get in the winter environments we have, and so that might advance the deterioration of a bridge. So we're not recommending precasting these concrete abutments. Concrete girders, their girders are the beams that go across the abutments, across the water. The Ninth Street Bridge is an example of precast concrete girders. I don't know if anyone remembers them coming in on specially designed trucks with steerable back wheels on them, and they roll them up to the job site, and large cranes hoist them into place, and it's done quite routinely and quite relatively easily. So that's the type of construction we're recommending. Bridge deck, again, is another one. The deck sits on top of the girders. We're looking at precast panels that might sit on top of these girders to make the construction go more quickly. On the other hand, again, there's cold joints between the panels that may affect the longevity of the bridge design. So we're going to spend a little time during the detailed design phase and see which of those approaches is best supported. And of course, railings. There's always people like the railings and the detail that goes into them, and some of the panels can be precast, and making that installation fairly quick. So basically, again, these are the type of precast components that we're either supporting or not supporting through this process. We were also asked about what the efficiencies might be in what they call rapid replacement technologies. And this process is basically building the new bridge beside the existing one, then taking out the existing one and sliding the new one in place. It sounds quite easy, and it's not, but it's done on a lot of locations, particularly where they're building a secondary road over an expressway, for example. So you keep the expressway open, and you have lots of land area available to build a second bridge beside the one you're intending on replacing. So in a case like that, the duration of a road closure might be greatly reduced, but in this case, there are several disadvantages. We don't have a large area available. We have buildings right up to the street line. We have steep slopes, high voltage lines. We have poor soils, as I was speaking of earlier. You basically have to build a foundation under the bridge, as the new bridge, as you're building it in its temporary location. So the cost of a foundation would be significant. There would be challenges in moving a new bridge into position since you don't have any soil to push against. You're being over a river, so physically moving a bridge once built into its position, you can imagine how heavy that would be and the effort it would take to do that, and you've got nothing but water and poor soils to help you do that. And ultimately, there's an insignificant reduction in cost, construction time. So we're not supporting that. Other ways of helping the bridge construction process move more efficiently, generally any contract, we set a completion date. A contractor should be done or is intended to be done by a certain time, reasonable time. We have penalty clauses for late completion if they go beyond that completion date. Liquidated damages are often relatively high, and so the contractors would not want to go beyond their completion date. But also incentive clauses for early completion. Given a fair and reasonable completion date, if a contractor works diligently and is able to get the construction process done more quickly, then a bonus clause is sometimes a good incentive for them to do so. Another concept we had to consider or issue during construction is the impact this bridge construction would have on municipal services and public utilities. We worked with the City Water Department to determine a new 600 millimeter diameter water main would go across this new bridge. We've considered impacts on the sanitary sewers. Currently, the west side pumping station up by the Sargent Parkway pumps back to 10th Street through a force main. It dumps into a manhole that eventually goes under the river through an inverted siphon and into the east side interceptor sewer. We looked at opportunities to perhaps deal with, make alterations to the way that's arranged now, and from our considerations so far, it seems as though maybe addressing that through a separate project removed from the bridge would be more advantageous. Storm sewers, the east side storm sewer is relatively new. I think it was built in 2000. The one on the west side, we're recommending just some upgrades at the outlet and some water quality provisions to be resolved in the detailed design. Utilities, we've been working with Hydro and Union Gas. There's a high voltage hydro line that crosses the harbor just north of the bridge, and we are allowed to work within up to 3 meters of that line, so we should be well away from that, so it shouldn't be a construction-related issue. There's also we'll call it a smaller cable that crosses the east side of 10th Street, and we're working with Hydro to see if we can get that relocated before construction begins. Union Gas previously removed their utility off the bridge. They have a separate one that's been drilled across the water to the south of the bridge now, so that should not be an issue. Timing considerations. There are several factors that come involved in timing construction projects, specifically bridges. April is a half load season, so basically as the frost is coming out of the ground from the winter seasons, some of the more rural roads that are accesses for gravel pits and several of the other materials that are used, they become a little soft and spongy, so they don't like to have fully loaded trucks driving on those in the April half load season. Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans have in-water timing window restrictions, so they don't want you working in the water during fish migration seasons. So generally, July 1st to September 15th is the in-water timing window when you're permitted to work in the water. We have a winter work season here that may come into play, or probably will come into play, considering the duration of the construction. November through March, anything can happen in terms of the weather and snow, which complicates construction activities, specifically concrete works and asphalt works. And another timing consideration is, again, this MTO grant is only available till March 31st, 2021, so the bridge has to be substantially completed by December 31st, 2020. So we looked at three different options, actually, with all these constraints on timing. We had a good meeting with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry following our last Public Information Center, and some discussions with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and they've considered that there may be some, they would permit some alterations to the normal timing window to help accommodate this project. Their main concern is fish migrations when the temperature of water is about 5 degrees flowing through, so there's a couple of timing, there's some fairly significant timing flexibility they've permitted to us. So we've added this option 3 since our PIC2, which would see the construction process beginning about October 2019, which allows us to do the pile driving in the wintertime and some of the mass concrete work in the wintertime, so that we're working toward good weather after we're out of the ground, which is a little nicer than, say, option 2, where we're trying to put in our concrete work and paving in November, December timeframe. So again, that was largely the presentation we made to the public on July 10th. We received about 10 written comments through the process following that PIC. We've summarized them into 4 general points. Additional provisions for pedestrians and bicycles, again, was one of the general comments we've received. There was requests to add certain provisions to improve pedestrian visibility and safety. That was, again, specifically related to the northwest corner of the bridge, I believe, which we have some ideas around already, and we'll take some of the ideas also that were presented in terms of coloring the curbs and some of the crosswalks and those things. We'll take those into consideration during the detailed design phase. There's a request to further pursue an opportunity to provide a separate pedestrian and bicycle crossing at First Avenue West. Again, a below-grade crossing, which I spoke about earlier. Just some of the challenges associated with that. Again, limited vertical clearance between the bottom of the bridge and the water levels. Also, starting at the water level, we'd have to build back into the intersection to accommodate that. When you're back into the intersection, you're into the rest of the utilities and the services that are underground there, so it seems to be very significant replacements and encroachments in that area. So again, considering specifically that the traffic signals are intended to remain at that intersection, it makes sense to keep that crossing more or less as is. Further support active communities by ensuring consideration for complete street concepts. I'll speak about that in the next slide. Another general comment was the type of bridge, the design. It's an opportunity to showcase the harbor. Again, more discussion about traffic management during construction and the potential impact on businesses, and the construction timing, considerations for an alternate timing window. So these were, again, the summary of the comments we received from the public following the Public Information Center in July. This complete streets concept basically considers that the road is there for not just vehicles, but also cyclists and pedestrians. They should be given more or less equal consideration during the planning process. One of the specific comments was having a segregated bicycle route along 10th Street. The ways to accommodate that would be to widen the existing right-of-way. Currently, that 10th Street right-of-way is only 20 meters wide. When you consider that there's 14 meters of traffic lane and 3 meters on each side for sidewalks, there's not a lot of room left. in a 20-meter right-of-way to accommodate a bicycle lane, which would need to be at least a meter wide. And the current traveling lanes they're 4 3.5-meter wide lanes, which is about the minimum to accommodate truck traffic and buses and the heavy service vehicles. So trying to squeeze a bicycle lane into that kind of cross-section is a safety concern. Again, it's very challenging, I think, to widen it right away. Some of the buildings that are there are built right to the street line. You'd have to take buildings down in order to widen the right of way, and I don't think that's what we're interested in doing at this stage. Another option would be to reduce the cross-section to a 3-lane cross-section. This corridor optimization study investigated that. BTE was the design consultant on that process, and they found that ultimately that 3-lane cross-section would actually make traffic congestion on 10th Street worse than it is now, so it wouldn't be able to move the vehicles through as it does. So we're recommending that to basically maintain somewhat status quo. Other more appropriate routes are being planned through other city initiatives. Certainly 8th Street has a widened sidewalk on the north side already to accommodate bicycle traffic. The River Precinct project includes a multi-purpose trail along the west side of the river connecting 10th Street to 8th Street. Other opportunities across the 9th Street Bridge to get to from east to west side in the market area as well. So all those ideas are included in the River Precinct project, which we consider to be more appropriate than trying to squeeze a bike lane in on 10th Street. This comment was specifically about the style of the bridge and the opportunities to showcase the harbor. Clearly, it's one of the most visible structures in the downtown area. Certainly, we consider design during the design phase. Any physical improvements would be possible. Currently, we're considering a bridge design very similar to the 9th Street Bridge, again with decorative retaining walls on each of the 4 corners to hold back the slopes and provide opportunities for more enhancements on each of those corners. Our sense right now is if there are other amenities that want to be added to it, they could certainly happen at another time with other funding options. Again, the photos at the bottom show 9th Street Bridge and 10th Street Bridge with the flower baskets that are managed by the city and the DIA. So there are improvements there that are make it look good as it is now, and if there's anything else beyond that, certainly could be added at another date. Again, railing styles are always a factor in the detailed design. That's the part that people see, the street lights, those kinds of amenities would be all part of the detailed design phase. This comment we received speaks to the diversion of traffic on the bypass. One of the things we presented at the Public Information Center was we considered that in order to make a basic do-nothing alternative, 10th Street Bridge out of commission and the street pattern work as is, that about 40% of the traffic would need to be diverted to make that system work. And it's not that we were recommending that, it's just the way it was analyzed at that time. Again, we're not supporting the do-nothing alternative, we're kind of supporting optimizing the existing routes. So we're going to need to balance the use of the bypass. Again, encouraging people to come downtown and shop through a signage plan is key to that, but also allowing people to know that if their destination is beyond the city on the other side, then they may not want to be part of the congestion in the downtown. Again, we have to balance the traffic flow through the core and the needs of the businesses. And the comment here is the degree of traffic congestion will be inversely related to the volume diverted on the bypass. So that remains to be seen, although the options we're considering for these optimizing the existing network consider that no significant or no additional traffic is bypassing anyway, and we have some options there that seem favorable. So as a summary, I guess, of the recommended design, these are the recommended design concepts. The 7 of them have been speaking about. Traffic management during construction, we're recommending optimizing the existing routes. We're going to continue through a process that looks at what the best optimization solution would be. Traffic lane configuration, maintaining basically status quo with a 5-lane configuration. Pedestrian movements, improve visibility certainly, keep the 3-meter wide multipurpose trail connection with pedestrian crossings similar to existing. Bridge style, precast concrete girder bridge similar to the Ninth Street Bridge. Construction efficiencies, certainly utilize precast components where appropriate and provide for contractor incentives to get the work done as efficiently as possible. Municipal services and utilities will continue to work with the city's water department and engineering department to consider best approaches for those. And the implementation, the shortest construction timeline is practical, is what we're recommending, likely with an October 2019 starting date. So the next steps for this process, again, this is an environmental assessment planning process. So once the project is appropriately planned, we can move to the design and the construction phase. So with this presentation, we are hopeful that Council will provide an endorsement of the design alternatives we've been recommending. We would then finalize the ESR, which is the environmental study report, the documentation of the process. That gets provided to the city and posted for public consideration. We had advertised what's called a notice of completion to say that we have completed the planning process and we believe we're ready to move on to the design stage. That comes with a 30-day public review period where anyone can request the Minister of the Environment to invoke Part 2 of the Environmental Assessment Act, which basically means they think we haven't done enough work and more work is required to satisfy the planning process. Following the 30-day public review period, there's the process then continues on a detailed design and construction. So, thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Where am I going to start? Yeah, I'm going to start at this end for a change. You always get stuck.
Exciting. I only have 42 questions, so maybe we'll get to everyone else before 11. I'm kidding. Don't worry. I just wanted to ask John, that was a great presentation. Thank you. And, you know, from an engineering standpoint, I'm sure it all makes perfect sense, but when you start saying words like remove parking in one way and no left turns, I get a little squeamy as a politician because we sure hear a lot about this project in the community. I just wanted to go back to design concept number 1 for a second, and option 2, which was the option to leave, to do the bridge in stages and leave part of it open, because certainly I have been asked this question, I'll bet you 200 times on the street from people, and I'm just wondering, can you tell us, in terms of that option, how much is the additional cost and how much longer would it take the project if that approach were chosen? And a guesstimate is fine with me. If we're talking hundreds of dollars, I'd like to know. If we're talking millions of dollars, I'd like to know. And again, this is just something that I'm asked constantly in the community.
Well, through your worship, again, there's several factors involved in our recommendation or non-recommendation. But we haven't, I couldn't say we've crunched all the numbers on how that, what they would actually be or how the timeline would be. Suffice to say, I guess, we are very confident it would cost more and would take longer. However, some of the safety considerations are more outweighing the costs in this case.
Okay, I'd still be interested in knowing what we're talking about, because, I mean, in terms of some of the other options, I mean, if the structural safety is a concern, you can prohibit trucks from going on it. If pedestrians are a concern, you can prohibit pedestrians. But it is the kind of information that I'd like to at least have some sense of what we're talking about, because it's a big decision and it's going to have a dramatic impact on downtown Owen Sound. So, I mean, if we can get that information, that would be great. And I'm, like I said, I'm fine with a guesstimate, just to know what it is we're talking about there. And design concept number 3, I was a little unclear on whether there was going to be a sidewalk on the south side of the bridge or not.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wasn't sure about that. And just on design concept number 7, can the bridge be opened for use while the landscaping and cleanup goes on? Because those were sort of the last 2 months.
Yes.
Okay. And I just have one last question for staff, and that was when the big dig was done in Owen Sound, of course, I wasn't on council, what was done for the downtown merchants? I know there were some consideration given to downtown businesses in terms of the impact that the big dig was going to have on them, and I see this very much as having a similar impact on the downtown, and I just wondered what happened there.
Through you, Your Worship, and again, this is by recollection because we're moving on to well over 15 years ago, I guess. Financially, there was nothing done, but we certainly promoted, again, downtown was open for business. We worked with the DIA and the local merchants to make sure, as well as we could, we got our message out, and certainly John and I were chatting earlier this evening, and we will work with the DIA and the merchants to make sure we continue to get that message out through this project. But financially, there were no incentive done to the downtown at that time.
Okay, thanks. That's all, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Lemon?
Well, I am disappointed. We have a traffic problem at 10th Street Bridge. Now, this isn't going to solve any of that. It's going to give us a new bridge, but the same old problem. I think there's got to be some way of improving the flow of traffic through that area, and it's not here. That's number one. Number 2, a temporary bridge is not possible. And I really am a little surprised because during World War II, in the Battle of Normandy, the Canadian engineers put the Bailey Bridge across the Seine River in about 2 or 3 days. And it was capable of taking tanks, which are a little heavier than most cars. Now, how could it be done on the soft banks of the Seine, which are probably no better than our soil conditions? I didn't analyze it, so I don't know. But it's a slow-moving river, therefore the wet soil conditions exterior to the other side. Was that even looked at?
Mr. Ritchie?
If I could, Your Worship, certainly we did look at that, and I think it comes down to the abutments that were required today are far different than what would have been required at Normandy, and not trying to be facetious, Councillor, but the conditions they were operating in, it was more or less, we got to get across there. The abutments that would be required today to get a temporary bridge on would be, that would carry traffic under today's conditions with MTO. We've looked at it. It is not in the cards financially for the city.
Well, I'm really very disappointed in that one as well. I would love a pedestrian bridge at 11th Street. That would help the people who live on the west side get to the east side without having to go a block or 2 out of the road, and would look very beautiful. But the question of traffic on 10th Street, the major gross I get about this city is going from east to west. It's not bad for some reason going the other direction from west to east. And every day that I'm in that area, it's lined up. It's congested, and it's only going to get worse as the city gets built bigger. Now, here's my question to you. If we have to go and do something in remediation 5, 10, 15 years from now, the cost is going to, again, be in the millions of dollars. Wouldn't it be better to see if there's an alternative? There's got to be some way to improve the traffic flow there. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I appreciate what engineers do, and you find solutions. This is not a solution.
So,
And-
question, we're going to keep moving here.
Well, my question is very simply this. I will not vote for this, and I will strongly oppose it. And my question is, how long would it take you to find a solution? A workable solution?
Mr. Ritchie?
If I could, Your Worship, in fairness to John, who has worked very hard with a number of consultants, the bottleneck on 10th Street isn't only at the bridge. In fact, it's one of the wider areas that we have, we're an old city. Entire 10th Street has been built right out. There's no more room there. So the bottleneck isn't only at 10th, it's all the way up the corridor. We've looked at that issue. We've looked at alternatives through the EA process. Staff has, John has, and his staff. Many of the things that you've discussed, Councillor, we've looked at as options, and unfortunately, we've had to tick them off as either not financially doable, or we just don't have the room. But, there is no other option. We have looked at it. It's either financially out of our range, or there isn't a physical room without buying property all along 10th, not only around the bridge, but up the entire corridor, and certainly we're not prepared to do that.
I'm going to move on to Councillor Dodd here.
Other part of that question, because you just raised the point, could we not acquire some land to allow First Avenue East traffic to go to First Avenue West? A horseshoe around there?
Certainly, through your worship, anything's possible, but again, we're working on a budget. We have $3 million from the federal government. We haven't got to tender on this proposal. I know we have some estimates, and I don't see where we're going to have any more money to start buying additional properties and then expanding this project. So it's exponentially starts to get...
If you just do the U, you wouldn't have to acquire any of those buildings.
I think as we went through with that, and you're talking about that, I'll call it the 6th lane option.
Yeah.
There were turning radii there, John, I believe, that were challenges for vehicles. There were additional crossing lights we would have to put in. There was going to be pedestrian traffic issues. We have looked at all of those options. And I'm sorry to tell you that one by one, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, one by one, and Dennis, we went through and Brent, we just can't do it. We have looked at them, trust me. We've spent collectively hundreds of hours on this. I'm not going to say we haven't missed something, but we've sure looked at everything, and, I just don't want to hold out false hope that we go back and look again. I believe we'll be coming back with the money we have, the room we have, the turning radius we have. This will be the plan you're going to get if we go back and try it again.
Councillor Dodd, you had anything?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Thomas basically answered my questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to talk, first of all, I certainly understand the way you set it up. It was very easy to read and to understand. And I do want to say, when under Design Concept 7, I like option 3 because that takes it out of the middle of the summer when we seem to be busy with tourists, and that's looks good. Now, I just have, you talked about the traffic and diverting it and using taking the parked vehicles off. I'm assuming you're talking about 8th Street and 9th Street, that there would not be parking on those two streets. My concern is the big trucks that go to the elevator, and there's many of them every day. I would venture to guess there's at least a dozen huge trucks or more that go to the grain elevators. That half of them come down from the east and the other half come from the west. The west isn't a problem. They come down Alpha Street and turn on 14th Street. But the ones coming from the east come over the 10th Street Bridge and turn. They're going to have to come a different way and come either 8th or 9th Street. And I don't think there would be room for them to turn a corner with cars parking. So I'm just sort of guessing that cars would not be able to park close to corners on those streets in order for traffic to move.
Thank you. Through your worship, through the process, we contacted a lot of the trucking companies and to make them aware that this project was going to be happening in a certain time frame. We suggested that they would be probably better served by using the bypass routes, taking the trip around, specifically to the grain elevators, as you suggest. They could take the bypass around and come in on the west side anyway. That would be far more favorable for them and their timing and their operations to to take a little bit longer distance, but take them a lot less time and a lot less
Well, actually,
traffic.
they pretty well run all year, but they could, really, they could go all the way up and around and come down Alpha Street if that was necessary. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gregg.
Thanks, everybody. Just a couple questions, I guess, in response to what I've heard so far. I guess the idea of a separated bridge kind of worries me if we're contemplating driving pilings beside a 100-year-old bridge. I just see potential for more failure of the lanes that were in existence, and then we'd be right back to the same problem. I think it's quite probably complicated. We did have, in speaking to the traffic studies, we had all that information a year ago from a consultant that was all leading into this. So we've already addressed and examined all of that information, and we knew that this wasn't going to fully solve that. A couple questions to Mr. Slocum. One, you spoke of the width of the south sidewalk. I guess my first question is, on 10th Street, why couldn't it be wider? Because that would seemingly be something that easily could be wider. You could just merely extend the sidewalk or create some sort of a decorative overhang to the bridge as an alternative to just a 1.5 meter. And I guess I've got a couple other questions. Maybe then you can just make a comment if it's relative. I think, have we contemplated with Georgian, or communicated with Georgian Bluffs and the county? I think we want to make sure that, I think it's 15 or 5 goes up Harrison Park Hill. We would want to ensure that there's no planned work in the immediate future to the south on those roadways that would run concurrent to when we're doing this, particularly Inglis Falls Road, because we know that it's failing, and Georgian Bluffs is attempting to get funding to remediate that. That and the road adjacent to it could be critical entry points back into our downtown. So I think communication and trying to ensure that those routes are available is very important. And one other question, have we contemplated on-street parking for the 200 block of 10th Street during reconstruction in a similar manner to what 8th and 9th Street is now? Because we know that there's not going to be 4 lanes of traffic leading to a full stop. We know that some traffic will go to 2nd Avenue and split, but ultimately it's not likely to be 4 lanes of traffic. So that can help lessen the impact to businesses. I know firsthand when 8th Street slope failure occurred, the loss of $25,000 per quarter would easily not be out of question for businesses to be impacted financially by this. So it might be a little something to look at in that one block of 10th Street. And then on the preferred alternatives, I love the fact that you came up with one at 9 months. On July 10th, I challenged you and said, come on, Fergus is doing it this year as we speak from January. Completion is in October, and you provided a 9-month window there, so congratulations to you. But I would share Deputy Mayor Wright's comment that option 3 would be my favorite or preferred. It's a little longer, but I think I like the timing windows a little bit more so, and I think option 1 is just a little bit too rapid for us to maybe make work with all the necessary planning. So I think those are my thoughts, and maybe some questions.
It's up to you. Anything you need to reply or respond to?
I'll go off memory here, but the first question had to do with the south sidewalk on the bridge at 1.5 meters. Currently, there's a building in the way at the southeast corner, so widening the sidewalk will put you into the side of the building for now. So if there are other things maybe considered there yet. Certainly the connection of the bike trail from First Avenue East to First Avenue West might be something of interest there too, if the sidewalk could be widened. You mentioned the traffic routes and discussions with the county. Certainly the county's been part of the process to date. Some of the construction projects, I'm quite familiar with the Ingalls Falls Road reconstruction project because we're working on that one as well. That might be set up for 2019, but there's a lot of approvals work that has to happen for that fairly sensitive project also. So certainly a consideration as we're moving all these projects forward. We had considered some parking arrangements on 10th Street East between 2nd and 3rd Avenue because a couple things. One of the considerations that we've had so far in optimizing the routes is trying to protect that 2nd Avenue area. Basically try to keep it as is on 2nd Avenue itself. So the amount of traffic between 3rd Avenue East and 2nd Avenue East to be significantly reduced, and we think we could probably get some parking put back in on that section of 10th Street under these circumstances, so to help offset some of the parking that may have to be removed in other locations.
Good, thank you. Councillor McManaman.
Thank you, Worship. John, could you bring up the estimated timing schedule that you had, the 3 options? And while you're doing that, just to comment, I suppose, to the city manager, two points. One, Councillor Thomas's question, I think, was a valid one, that we get lots of questions about why not this, why not that. I think this would be a perfect opportunity for those frequently asked questions that we've done with other major projects about why can't you do this? And again, it's not meant to be a detailed analysis, it's to be, well, that cost $2 million more, that's why we didn't do it, or that would have delayed it by 6 months. Just so I think that's one of the main things we should be starting now, frequently asked questions. The second thing is, and John has dealt very well with the engineering side of this, the other pillar of this, I believe, is the downtown promotion. I think there needs to be a whole, outside of the engineering side of this, a discussion about, so specifically, what are we doing with about promotion for the downtown? What are the costs going to be? Who's bearing them? How's it working? I just think that's a point that you know, I don't think it should be shuffled or just one of all of these points. It's a significant pillar of the whole plan. So, and John, if I might, quick question. On the north side, the sidewalk on the north side is a bridge. It's its own bridge right now, the sidewalk.
That's true.
Is that to stay in place? Or is it being removed?
The intention is to remove that existing, it's a box girder, it's called. It's a separate bridge. It's off the north side of the original bridge. That would be removed, and the new sidewalk would be incorporated into the new structure.
Okay, thank you. You had said the sanitary sewer siphon that goes under the Sydenham right there, this wouldn't really be part of this project, so there's no advantage. I know that's a choke point, for a better word, that causes bypassing. There's no advantage when the bridge is out to working on that, and I know you're probably going to tell me, or somebody's going to tell me money, but you know, bypassing of sewage is a big concern. If the bridge is out, there's a siphon that goes right under there. There's no advantage to working on it when the bridge is out?
Your Worship, my original hope was that we would be able to get a gravity sewer across the bridge up in the girders as we did on 9th Street. But the grades that we are dealing with would not permit that. The sewer would be well below the girder elevations into the water, basically. So gravity sewer across the bridge was not an option in that case. And in discussions with the engineering group, there were other considerations for maybe rerouting the force main across another location north of the bridge in the future, so to reduce the length of force main required. So another job for another day, I guess.
But the bridge being out isn't advantageous to working on that now? Either way, if the gravity sewer is not going to work, I mean.
That's right, yes.
Okay. You talked about, where are we? Oh, on the schedule here, right, the schedule that's up there. And I guess maybe I'm missing something. One of the options is 9 months. The other ones are 12 and 14. With time being money here, I'm just not clear. Option 1 would have us closed through 2 summers. I'm assuming that's not going to be the end, is the longest one, so I'm assuming that's not going to go. But perhaps you could provide some clarification why, I just don't understand why option 2 isn't 3 months difference of bridge closure would seem to me to be a very key factor.
Your Worship, One of the challenges with option 2 is a bit of a late start. I'd say April 2020 would be about the time frame. And as I suggested, we have to have this bridge substantially completed by December 2020. So in this case, the 9-month construction timeline is incredibly tight. We've showed that as this is what would have to happen in order to make that work. But it is an incredibly tight time frame.
Just so we're clear for tonight, though, that's still on the table to be considered. I just, anyway, I guess there's one, further to Councillor Thomas's question earlier, there's one I'd want to know a lot more about before, if we're not going with the shortest timeline, I'd want a very, very thorough answer as to why that couldn't happen. So, and my last point is, I guess, again, to the city manager, I've been dealing with a lot of projects through the years, and it always sounds good to have a penalty clause in there, a late clause. And what always happens is the companies always have legitimate reasons of why they're late, usually weather or something related, something beyond their control. And if we're going to invoke the penalty clause, it's going to involve litigation and years of litigation and cost and lawyers' costs, and every time it's just not worth it. And so I do think this might be one of the first times that I'd be in favor of us looking at some sort of an incentive. I don't know anything about them, how they work in other projects. We'd need to know a lot more information. But, if you're talking about, earlier you said something like 30 to 40% of the traffic being diverted to the bypass, or trying to get it diverted to the bypass, boy, those are some pretty big numbers. And if an incentive means a contractor moves even by weeks earlier, I don't know, we'd have to look at the money, but it might be worth it. So anyway, that's just one concept that's never really been seriously looked at in the past, and I think it should be in this case.
Part of our internal discussions, Your Worship, and Councillor McManaman has mentioned it, we have found invoking those clauses extremely difficult, and as well, when you go through a tender process, all the contractors are aware they may be paying it. You're paying for that up front in the tender as well. So there'll be further discussion amongst John and his staff and ours on that. But certainly, I think we're intrigued to do everything we can to keep projects on time. I'll leave it at that.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Your Worship. You're smirking at me.
Yeah, good. No, go ahead.
So, John, on almost every slide, there's a recommended, not recommended, recommended. By who? Is that you, GM Plan, or is that you and staff? Who is that?
No. So, Your Worship, ultimately it's the recommendation of the design team. Yes, meaning including staff as well, yes.
Including staff. Okay. And it'd be safe to say that none of that changed after the public meeting?
That's true.
Right. So my point is, this is a really, really big decision. And I go back to when we listened to the consultant, and I'm with Councillor Lemon on the 6-lane bridge. I just feel like this has been thrown out, this is out, this is out, this is out. Now council's going to make the decision. And that's not good enough. Like, I just feel like I need to know more. I want to know more about, I like the idea of the 6-lane bridge so that you could go from First Avenue East to First Avenue West without going on to 10th Street. So everyone in Balmy Beach and out the Brook area, they don't even go on 10th Street. They just wrap around. And the consultant at the time said, we don't have the numbers to support it. But this bridge we're building is for the next 50 years. So where did it go? Where did the 6-lane, what happened there? Was it just money? Was it, like, to me, the idea works.
I'll start, and certainly John will probably finish. Technically, I believe it was a matter of the turning radius. You have buildings on both sides, on all sides of those corners. You begin to shrink as you start expanding the turns. That's one issue. And again, trust me, Councillor, I want to say we didn't just throw anything out. We looked, and John's technical ability as well as our in-house engineering to go, because when that concept came forward first from the public, I, like you, thought, that's great. I like that. Let's go. The professionals looked, and I'm certainly not pointing the finger at them, they convinced me, here's why, here's why, here's why. Perhaps for council's sake, you know, we don't expect you to pass these recommendations tonight. Perhaps if we get down to several key points, and I can understand from councilor's perspective, the sixth lane, as we're calling it, is something you'd like to be convinced, as I was, that in fact, there are some technical reasons that it probably isn't our best solution, and also some financial. We won't be able to crunch the numbers financially because we haven't gone to tender yet. But what are we perhaps looking at? Ballpark for financials, the difference. And come back in 2 weeks with a more thorough report on that for council to, as I have become convinced that as much as that sounds great, I just don't believe it's there. We'd be more than prepared to do that. Is that fair, John?
I'm sure there's an explanation for everything. I'm just saying that we're making this decision. And like, I don't care if we get into a room from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. Maybe we can have a meeting just on the 10th Street Bridge and have a better understanding of why some of these things were thrown out. I might be stealing an idea from the mayor, but the fifth lane, why can't the fifth lane be a wraparound First Avenue to First Avenue and be one way in the morning and one way coming the other way in the afternoon? Was that ever an option? And if not, why?
We did consider just the fifth lane, and again, it comes down to, and this is where John and Dennis' staff are far more factual on this than I am, but it comes down to you have pedestrian traffic that is trying to cross lanes, you need additional lighting, et cetera. But again, we can certainly bring that all back, a specific report around the 5th/6th lane option. And if council, after looking at those, says we still want to try it, we can certainly go to tender and design to do that. We just don't, quite frankly, think, well, let's wait till we get there before we get into that discussion.
And I'm good, like, usually I'm always with staff, and usually we have good explanations. I just think this is a really big decision, and I just want to know that we've gone through every single idea and understand, you know, why and why not we're doing different things. And right now, there's no way I'm making a decision on what I've seen here tonight because I don't think I have enough information. Just being honest. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Kepke?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, John, for your presentation and the detail that you put into it. My comments are regarding traffic flow and diversion of traffic. I'm certainly not in favor at all of putting any signage at Rockford telling people to go elsewhere if they want to go through Owen Sound. Because once those creatures of habit have gone that way, they're not coming back. I don't think this is hurting just downtown business. It's hurting all businesses, all services, people that go to the hospital for appointments. It's hurting everyone in Owen Sound. I'm very confident that the detour routes you'll have over the other two bridges will be quite adequate to accommodate the people that we have going through Owen Sound. And definitely there will be a slowdown, but people who go to Sauble Beach already know there's a bypass to go to Sauble Beach. We don't want to stop them from coming downtown or coming through Owen Sound to use our services. I just am totally opposed at signage at Rockford. If you want to put it at the entrance of Owen Sound to show them the alternate routes, that's great, but definitely not at Rockford. River Precinct, to staff, when does that plan to happen, and are there any road closures planned for that?
Through Your Worship, River Precinct will be certainly something staff discuss in the 2019 budget, but also leading into that, as you've heard, we have a number of projects that we have to do prior to the bridge starting that quite frankly has taken some precedent in our thinking. So I fully would love to come back in the 19 budget and say we're proposing the first phase of River Precinct, but it may have to wait until after, depending on the work we have to do to get ready for the bridge.
Good. I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much for your presentation, very detailed. I want to thank council too for coming as prepared as you did with questions, and Jim, you're going to be missed. Thanks. Thank you. We don't need any motions, Ms. Bloomfield, to receive those Okay. Down to number 10, public question period. Seeing none. Correspondence received, which direction? We have none. Number 12, report from junior planner with regard to site plan approval for 14th Street West, Salvation Army. Ms. Coulter?
Thank you, Your Worship. If we could just go to the site plan kind of at the back of the report. This is an application for site plan approval by Dixon and Hicks for the Salvation Army. The changes really, the highlights include there will still be two separate entrances from 14th Street, but those will be sort of separated. The most westerly one will be a loading area, and the more easterly entrance on 14th will be the one to the Citadel with a new drop-off to a new canopy in that area, as well as a new pedestrian link to the municipal sidewalk. The play equipment will be relocated in that west interior side yard, and there's really no changes in that rear parking area. The property is designated residential and institutional, and both those designations permit a place of worship. It looks for adequate parking, pedestrian safety, landscape, as well as encouraging compatible uses. And subject to the recommendations, we feel this site plan meets the requirements of our official plan. In terms of zoning, it's zoned institutional C3 and R4, and all of those again permit a place of worship. This plan was presented at our recent Accessibility Advisory Committee, and the recommendations of the committee have been incorporated into the plan. Save and except, the committee had asked that they examine, there's two barrier-free parking spaces that are located on the north or front side of the building in the new kind of loading area and access to the food bank area. They'd asked about a direct access to the building, and that really won't be a public access, so there is a sidewalk provided to the Citadel or the more easterly entrance that makes a lot of sense. So from those accessible spaces to the front door. So the recommendation is that council would approve the site plan subject to the three conditions, and that you would pass a bylaw authorizing the mayor and clerk to enter into a new site plan agreement.
Councillor Kepke?
I'm happy to move that recommendation, Your Worship.
Good. Questions? Anybody? Call the question. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Pam. 12B, with regard to the lease of the restaurant, the airport. Dennis?
Thank you, Your Worship. The city advertised a request for proposal for the lease and operation of the restaurant located at the Billy Bishop Airport. The city received two submissions. The proposals were evaluated by a team consisting of staff from various departments, including Public Works and Engineering and Community Services. The successful proponent was 2644852 Ontario Incorporation. It's the young ladies that are currently operating or working at the restaurant snack bar located at the temporary City Hall downstairs. The proposal revenue that will be generated from this will be $12,000 plus HST on an annual basis. This actually works out pretty good timing. Based on council's approval, because we just received the assessment of the kitchen equipment, which was assessed at a fair market value of just over $10,000 and of a value of $12,000 in place. So we'll be including that as part of the negotiation to determine whether or not they wish to purchase it and lease it from the city.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas?
Move the recommendation.
Any questions? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Number 13 is consent agenda.
Through your worship, on the consent agenda this evening is a report respecting the County of Grey Plan of Subdivision 442T 2017-05, minutes for receipt from the Downtown Improvement Area Board of Management, 2 planning notices where no further comment was required, and correspondence received which is presented for the information of council. A full listing is available at 13E.
Moved by myself that City Council receive item 13A to 13E on the consent agenda dated August 27, 2018, and further that the recommendation contained in report 13A be approved.
And all in favor? That is carried. Going to go back to 13B. There are minutes from Owen Sound DIA. Oh, sorry, Jim, did you have your hand up first? Sorry.
I just had a comment about 13A, Your Worship.
Go ahead with that, then.
All
we'll
right,
go in
thank you.
order.
I just would comment, this was about a subdivision planned in Georgian Bluffs, just south of Cobble Beach. The city had some concerns with this. We have had concerns with subdivisions in this area before. I would just note, I'm usually the one that's pretty critical. I will congratulate the Township of Georgian Bluffs, the County of Grey, and the developer. This subdivision is now proposed, after discussions, this subdivision is now proposed to be on full municipal services. Therefore, the city's concerns with this application have been addressed. So I just thought it was important. We were asked for comment. We commented. The county, the township, the developer. It's on full municipal services. So that's great. No more concerns from the city. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks. Go ahead, Mary.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to the DIA minutes from July, not a lot of business dealt with other than discussion and logistics on the public meeting that's going to be held on August 30th, this Thursday, at the Bay Shore here. And at that meeting, there will be various presentations by staff and by the DIA to talk about business-sponsored parking in the downtown.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Seeing none, good, thank you. So move down to number 14, committee minutes with recommendations for approval. 14A is Community Services Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've had 2 long deputations tonight. I'm going to do my best to not be a third one, but this is a fairly lengthy agenda. I'll try and move quickly through it. The first deputation that we received at the committee was about Play in Bruce Grey initiative, physical activity strategy for Grey and Bruce that includes all 17 municipalities and one of the First Nations communities in the region. It started in 2006 through Public Health, and the city joined in then, and in 2012 all 17 municipalities signed on again. There's a charter before us tonight asking, the committee is recommending that council authorize the mayor to sign the charter again, that Owen Sound will be part of the Play initiative. Basically, it's to increase physical activity in Bruce and Grey outside of the minor sports programs. Although those are all important, this is sort of outside of that. There are 2 play kits full of all sorts of balls and bats and this type of thing for kids to use. If council passes this tonight, one will be available for sign out at the library. The other one will be kept in community services for city events like our annual movie night, or our regular movie night, which is again this Thursday, by the way, at Kelso Beach at 8:30. Anyway, children can come and use those play kits at that time. I'm just going to skip over the ice allocation discussion for one moment, if I might, move on to the other points. An exciting development, the Owen Sound North Stars senior women's lacrosse team is requesting a letter of support from the city to join the Ontario Women's Box Lacrosse Association and begin operations in Owen Sound. So hopefully that works out for them. Committee's recommending that council does support that initiative. The county's official plan was up for review. We have commented on it several times. There's a long list of items in there around servicing, stormwater, settlement areas, and the like. I would suggest that the city has commented, and many of our comments were accepted and revised into the plan. We will be sending our continuing comments, though, forward to the county and to the ministry as part of this discussion. We had we had our Heritage Property Tax Relief Program. That's where 12 designated properties in Owen Sound are eligible to have a 20% reduction in the municipal taxes and education portion of their taxes. That's an ongoing program that the city has to try and support heritage buildings in the city. The amount for 2017 was just over $13,000. 2 facade grants for 606 2nd Avenue West and for 925 2nd Avenue West, 2 older homes, and committee's recommending that we proceed with facade grants for those buildings. Now, back to the ice allocation. As people who have been around, followed this for a while, there is an ice allocation policy in Owen Sound. We have 35-plus regular users of the ice facilities in Owen Sound. With that many users, sometimes there are competing interests, competing problems. So we developed an ice allocation policy that establishes a fair and equitable ice allocation that maximizes the use of the facility and is fiscally responsible. As we all know, there are pockets of ice that are not used, and that is revenue that the city's not receiving. For this year, we had one ice conflict, I guess you would say, that was brought forward through minor hockey and girls hockey to staff, and then at the Community Services Committee, as the policy says. There was a dispute over after minor hockey books approximately 2,000 hours with us, girls hockey about 500 hours with us. There was a dispute over an hour and a half of ice time on a Wednesday night. I would say that, so all the groups put in their ice requests, city staff analyzed that, try and slot it all into place, and at this point there was an hour and a half that we had trouble accommodating. The main reason was, as people recall from our review, core services review, where we looked at all ways to increase revenue, the Grey Bruce Highlanders have asked to rent ice in Owen Sound on weekends and on a Wednesday night. Staff tried to fit them in, and this is where this disputed hour and a half came in. After a lengthy report for staff, for the committee from the Manager of Community Development and Marketing, and also a letter of correspondence from minor hockey, we were seeing both two sides of the story, I guess you would say. There is I guess I would say the ice allocation policy, just so it's clear, it's quite a long document, and it's meant to be read in its entirety. It does not say that every group will have 100% of everything they've asked for and the exact time they've asked for it, that they will be granted that. That is never was the intention of the policy. It was to deal with it in a fair and equitable manner. I don't have the numbers right here, I probably should, but minor hockey was receiving something like 98% of the ice they were asking for. Girls hockey was somewhere around 94 or 95% of the ice they were asking for. It was when we had the opportunity to have an additional booking from the Highlanders hockey team, that was an additional $16,000 in revenue to the city, and that's why we're moved ahead. I would say, you will see there's a resolution there, and that resolution does still stand, that if one of the minor hockey teams or one of the girls hockey teams does not operate, there would be potentially some ice available on Wednesday nights. After this meeting, staff sat down and tried to work on an alternative, and did find an alternative solution that isn't mentioned in the minutes, because I suppose it was a regular staff function. They managed to squeeze some of the groups forward. Mel O'Neill and Puffers Hockey in particular were pushed back somewhat. They were very good to work with. We need to thank them for their accommodating our requests, but it appears that we are able to currently fit all the needs of minor hockey, girls hockey, and the Highlanders group on the Wednesday night. So I guess with the really long way of saying is this dispute that you're reading in the minutes has been settled. The resolution does still move forward, because if those teams do not operate as stated in the minutes, we'll have to see what happens with that ice at that point. But I don't want to be remiss. We did receive an email today from minor hockey. They don't necessarily agree with the report as written. They feel there's some inaccuracies, and they do feel that there's some inaccuracies in the minutes. When they were asked to detail what those were, they haven't got back to us. So either way, though, I think the resolution, I stand to be corrected, but I think all parties will be happy with the resolution as it's been found. So. And I would say I've done ice allocation reviews for quite some time. This was one of the more difficult ones. It was a challenging one. We spent an hour and a half on it on last committee meeting. So anyway, I'm just pleased to say that we seem to have found a solution that all parties are, if not happy, at least agreeable to. With that, Your Worship, I do have an additional motion that I would bring if you would allow me to after this, but with that I would move the the minutes of this meeting.
So nothing within the report has to be amended?
No.
Good. Okay, questions? Anybody? Councillor Gregg?
I just have a few questions. First, again, I touched on it before. Back to the comments on the official plan. I'm not sure why we comment on having banks and personal service shops excluded from the Sunset Strip, because to me, what if Hepworth wanted a bank or a personal service shop, or you know, a Chatsworth or another municipality that's maybe not on full services? I'm not understanding why we're trying to dictate, even though it may be in direct competition. It just doesn't seem to be, I don't know how you rationalize that.
It's our
that's
river,
just-
but go ahead, Pam.
Through you, Your Worship, it's not an issue of competition. It's staff's professional recommendation to you that the uses in the Sunset Strip, as defined in the county's official plan, are to be those that are dry in nature. So banks, personal service shops, you know, they could create significant loading on private septic systems and in an area that's adjacent to the Potawatomi River, which feeds into Georgian Bay. And that's been the city's concern, and it's been our concern over some time, and it's just being consistent with those comments.
Okay, because I just wondered how that would then be accepted or at the county level, where you would have others saying, well, we're on limited services in my municipality, and what you're asking would seem to be somewhat limiting to us, but that's where I'm coming from there. On the ice allocation, just a few things. I guess, you know, I spent years coaching, and when I read through that, there was a lot of references to the canceled ice in the report, and it's a sum of the total hours lost. But in the years where I was coaching with minor hockey, rep hockey knows their schedule much further out. They know in the spring, and house league doesn't even get going till Thanksgiving. And our report seemed to put a lot of emphasis on September canceled hours. And I know then also from coaching, when there's tournaments that come up through the year, or the Attack have a rescheduled game, and minor hockey would get rescheduled, I might go, that's fantastic, I have a night off. But the report doesn't seem to acknowledge that type of thing, and I'm wondering if there's, you know, almost a column that's missing here, so it can be better explained that it's not minor hockey that would cancel those. House league, 40% of the kids probably aren't even signed up yet. They're not even thinking about it. It doesn't even get going till late September, so it's almost,
Going to go to Councillor McManaman.
No, if you might, and it's a good segue into the additional item I wanted to bring up. If you read the report, there is you can't help but notice that there's a large component of canceled ice. I think for minor hockey it was over 500 hours of ice they booked and then was canceled. Girls hockey was about 130 hours. And let me be clear, I'm not in any way blaming anyone for that, because you've detailed some reasons and that are perfectly valid. They're all done within the policy that's approved by council, so in no way is this a blame, but I do think council needs to have a committee, and then council needs to have a thorough look at so those are pretty big chunks of time that have been canceled. Are they all September? If it is, that's a pretty explainable thing. Are they all when some of the rep teams are canceled, or their season ends, you know, they're out of the playoffs and they're done? That's another explainable thing. But I think we need to get our head around just a thorough discussion about all that canceled ice. Are we missing opportunities there? Perhaps we're not, but I don't think we really have a handle on that. And that's what my additional motion would be, that at the end of this season, we ask staff to
Just hold on for a
Yep,
second, we'll
that's fine.
finish wrapping up this one. Okay, okay.
and just my last, there was some reference to a skills development camp that they had been wanting to do. Where did that end up getting shuffled in the process, or where's it at?
I'm not 100% sure just at this point, but most of those are in the morning. They were talking about if this Wednesday night time became available, that they would like to use that for some of the skills camps. At the time of the meeting, the committee considered that if that time became available, we saw the additional revenue opportunity with AAA to be, I think it's fair to say, a higher priority. So we'll, basically, to answer your question, we'll just have to wait and see, do those two teams operate? If they do, then they'll operate. If they don't, what happens at that time? I think, again, we're getting, that'll be a little too far into the minutia. That'll be a staff function to allocate the ice in a fair and equitable manner, and we'll see. And it very well could be those camps, it could be other things. I don't know at this time.
Okay, fair. Thank you. Anyone else over there? Any questions? I think when we lose $750,000 approximately that the taxpayers pay for the 3 ice surfaces or 2 buildings, that $16,000 becomes pretty important every year, and it's we're going to have to start thinking about that more and more and more, that we can't afford to be passing that up for. Trying to give somebody 100%, but anyway. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Now back to you, Councillor McCann.
Just thank you to staff. If a report could come back at the end of the season, the ice season, through community services, about canceled ice, the amount of ice that was booked, the amount used, the amount canceled, and alternatives or solutions, if any, that need to be found within the policy.
Okay, any questions on that? Go ahead.
I just wondered whether Councillor McManaman will be coming back to help us out with that at the end of the ice season.
Nothing I like better than an hour-and-a-half ice allocation meeting. Yes, I'll be happy to consider that.
Good try. All in favor? That is carried. 14B, Minutes of Economic Development and Tourism Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a good meeting here last week. First of all, we had a deputation from Will McReynolds. He runs KP9 Interactive, which is down on 10th Street East here in Owen Sound. So Will wanted to come and give a presentation on why cities needed to be smart. So what Will's business, he deals with augmented reality. Basically, you put on a set of glasses and you can be a part of virtual reality. So everything you see becomes here on your eyes. So it's great. It's a new piece of technology. He's trying to see how augmented reality can be used to power cities, creating like smart environments. So one of the things he showed in his video was garbage trash containers. You would be able to read with beacons, would be able to tell when the trash levels were full, or when someone was walking on in a parkway, lights would be able to automatically illuminate by the sense of your cell phone with Bluetooth capability. So he came to give a presentation basically on some of the key important parts of what a smart city has on environmental impact, cost savings, efficiency gains, connectivity, and economic prosperity. We had the manager of information technology at the meeting as well, and he advised that he has been investigating in some of these smart city initiatives and looking at building the network in the downtown core. Traffic counts are already available using cameras installed in that area, and he's going to continue looking at including stoplights and streetlights and getting sensors on them. So that would give you basically an understanding if you're driving through the downtown 10th Street corridor, and if you use a smartphone, it could send you a notification saying that you have a backlog on 10th Street, you should make a left-hand turn and take an alternate route. And find to divert from traffic. So there is apps already out there that are done. One's called Waze, and it will track which way you're going to go to give you the proper and quickest time to get to wherever your location you're going to. Following that, we got a verbal report from our manager of community development and marketing for the Are You the Most Phase 2 campaign. Phase 1, we did receive 75 applicants for that position. 8 came to Owen Sound. 1 moved with his wife, so I would classify that as 2 people. Yuri created his contracting business, and his wife is actually opening up her own home furnishing and design business. So what Brent Fisher wanted to give us an update on was they launched the Phase 2 about 3 weeks ago with a call for host applicants. They've so far received 25 applications to date. So we're just giving us an update of what's going on in the future, gathering some new hosts, and to get those first meets up here prepared and everyone's ready to go. So, and I think a more really exciting part that came out of that meeting was there was a couple from Vancouver. So unfortunately, they weren't able to be a part of this campaign because they live so far away. But it was discovered at that meeting that the couple from Vancouver actually had moved and live in Owen Sound. So they used our marketing idea. They got a feel from what the city was. The city was able to respond with proper marketing information. They couldn't physically move them here, but they got enough about the city to realize this is a place where they wanted to be. So they have moved and now currently live in the city of Owen Sound, and they weren't one of our members that came and did of the 8 that came to Owen Sound to do that tour. So I think that's pretty impressive and just shows you that some of these visitors that did come, for those 8 visitors that did come, and even the other 75 who didn't come for the initial in-person meeting, was that this is a long-term plan, something different of a marketing idea to attract to individuals that we really are striving to get into our community. So everyone knows that everyone has a regular life. Everyone would have to go and find a new home, sell their home, move their children out of schools. These aren't things that just happen with the snap of your fingers. These are things that are going to be long-term planned, and it's great to see that this is happening. Next, we had a committee discussion, something that was previously dealt with back probably when I was on economic development. Maybe I wasn't even on council yet, might have been my year before council. It was about the beautification of downtown storefronts. As we all know, we have some vacant storefronts in the downtown core, and there was an initiative that was created back in the day through economic development in partnership with the Tom Thompson Art Gallery, where they would be able to go through some of the DIA vacant store inventory, and they were able to partner with some building owners and put up some artwork. So DIA had done the old Mr. Sub that was on the corner of 10th and 2nd, and they also were able to do one on the old River Cafe. So they're able to find some connections with some of the building owners that had some vacant storefronts, put up some artwork, and to kind of beautify our downtown core. So we wanted to bring this back up again because obviously the Tom Thompson Art Gallery, they're pretty tight right now on some of the things that they can do. So this is something that we wanted to bring back to the Economic Development Committee and just get a feel whether or not this was something that the committee would like to be back involved with. We all know that how beautiful it is to see when we have some more beautiful signage in our downtown core. So after that meeting, or with the discussion, Marianne Alton, clearly identified that we have 3 new galleries here in the downtown community, and it'd be nice to have an opportunity to connect with them and find out if they'd be interested in presenting some of their artwork in some of those vacant storefronts. So the Director of Community Services, Pam Coulter, and Ms. Alton are going to be connecting with the city receives the inventory. The DIA has an inventory of the buildings that are in the downtown core that have vacant storefronts. So the 3 of them are going to get together, and we're going to reach out to some of these galleries downtown and see if they're willing to collaborate with the city and the vacant storefront owners on this initiative. So I thought that was a really good, successful story as well, to see the partnerships that we do have in the community between some of our private building owners and the partners that we have within our city. And that is all I have, Your Worship. So I move accept approval of those minutes.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Lemon?
Well, not a question so much as a comment. We don't know that some of those 8 that haven't located yet in Owen Sound, 2-3 years from now, may come here as a result of this. So I was thinking about that after our meeting, Economic Development and Tourism meeting, that some of this is going to be flow through in the future, and it's going to be almost impossible to keep track of. But I think you'll find there's more benefits accumulate over time of that first year and over the second year. I think it's a great program, and I think it's well worth doing.
Actually, to that, Councillor Lemon, I've had somebody in my office very recently that moved here because of that program that the city won't be aware of. So it's one already that went, saw it, saw the advertising, came up and test drove the city on their own, and here they are. Anything further?
No, I was just going to agree with you, Councillor Lemon. That's exactly the point of the initiative. You can put a billboard up in the 401 for $25,000 and attract 0 people, but someone could drive by it every single day. Or we can actually get the people that are involved and have the initiative to join into our community, come up here and experience it for themselves and realize why Owen Sound's so great.
I'm going to call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Well done. Where am I? Operations.
Thank you. Your worship, I'll be removing item 8B from the minutes, and I'll do the regular report first. So I'm glad to see we've got the airport situation figured out with the restaurant. During our discussions, we talked about the negative impact having that restaurant closed. It had a negative impact on the traffic in and out of the airport. A committee discussed advertising for the airport, whether it be through brochures, website, or social media. We suggested staff discuss with the new contractor ways to promote the airport. We had a brief discussion about the cost of recycling, fiber, aluminum cans, plastic, and glass. Mayor Body encouraged staff to look into organics as well as the biodigester in Georgian Bluffs at the time of the next contract, and to discuss with the neighboring municipalities. Current contract with Miller Waste is good until 2023. Water and wastewater discussions. Committee approved transferring $100,000 originally slated for a water main lining trial to installing a check valve chamber on the industrial trunk water main. You'll recall on January 10th of this year, a serious water main break occurred near its connection to the industrial trunk main north of the water treatment plant. There is a possibility of this happening again, so the installation is a higher priority. The check valve installation will provide a barrier to prevent high flows from draining the industrial system to the location of the break. We also had a verbal report from staff regarding the July 31st water main break on 10th Street West. The lessons learned have not fully been digested, but Matt Prentice did make a couple of points. Modifications to the water distribution system and valve chambers should be considered. Water system upgrades required to support the 10th Street Bridge project may need to be expanded in scope to provide better redundancy to ensure it doesn't happen again. And with that, your worship, I would move approval of those minutes, save and accept item 8B.
Any question on the motion? All in favor? That is carried. Back to you.
Thank you. So on the large vehicle parking on city streets, well, I'll just go through my quick report on that first. Staff advised that a cost of $15,000 would allow for signage stating the large vehicle parking ban. At the suggestion of Deputy Mayor Wright, committee chose not to spend the $15,000 and asked staff to find other ways to notifying the public. Committee also asked staff to provide a report in a year's time regarding number of phone calls, number of tickets, and if the amount of $40 on the ticket is enough. So just in short, this bylaw covers say a truck and a boat, or a truck and a trailer that sits in front of someone's house day in and day night. So it takes away from the parking overnight from 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. But what's missing in this is the school buses, which is one of the reasons why this came forward in the first place. So banning the trailer and large vehicle parking from 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. Does nothing for the school buses that are doing their morning run, taking their school buses home, parking them in front of someone else's house for 5 hours a day. I think we could all agree that no one wants to sit and look out the front window at a school bus when the guy that's driving it is living down the street, and I think that's what's happening. So I'm not looking to change the bylaw at all. There's 6 items on the bylaw. I'm just simply asking that council consider adding one more, and that motion will go like this. A person shall be allowed to park and store a motor bus, including a minibus and school bus, on a roadway in a residential zone for a maximum of 2 hours, from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. If such a vehicle is removed, it shall not be parked within 500 meters from the point at which it was first parked. So that should eliminate, it's not taking away buses parking on residential streets completely, but it does take away from the school bus driver that's parking it for 5 hours in front of someone else's house.
So that's in addition to the motion that's there?
Correct.
6 points, okay. So it'd be like the 7th point buried in there somehow. Questions? Councillor Gregg.
Thanks, Mayor Body. I voted in favor of the motion the way it is, and I'm on operations. I've sat through the public meeting. I've seen the comments we've had. I am empathetic to the gentleman, and I'll say gentleman, because it's only been one complaint about the bus that I've seen coming through on this. This was a policy meant to be more broad and encompassing across the city for some issues such as having a boat and perhaps opting not to get a slip at the marina to keep it in, and using the city street for convenience. And it's creating, sure it's unsightly, but it's creating safety issues and dangerous issues in some instances. The staff worked pretty hard on this over a period of several months, and I kind of did like what we've came to here. The problem with adding this part about a bus is you're asking, I think, council now to walk into a dispute, potentially, which is possibly between neighbors. And I don't think that's where council wants to go with any sort of bylaw. You know, it bothers that person, it's an orange school bus, but it may bother someone else if it's a big tow truck or a different work truck. You get into a real slippery slope of here, where do you draw the line? I don't like what I see across the road from my neighbor. I don't want that in on my street, in my neighborhood. That's not what the intent of this policy or bylaw should be. I think we are creating or asking for a lot of problems here in opening this up with that inclusion. It's just going somewhere where council, I don't think, wants to go or should go, because ultimately behind it, and I don't care if I can go to speak to the neighbor every 2 days and kindly ask him to move his bus and park it away on Dufferin Street on 3rd Avenue, and see if that neighbor would cooperate or not cooperate. But I think in doing what you're asking here is going with a bylaw where council does not want to go. So I would vote against that myself.
Going to go to Deputy Mayor Wright.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. I just, I think perhaps this should be sent back to committee. So I would put a motion on the floor that we send this back to committee for further discussion.
Okay, so that motion trumps the other motion for discussion. Any discussion on sending it back to committee? Seeing none, going to call the question. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's that is passed. It goes back to committee with that portion. Now, what should we do?
Now what do we do?
With the remainder part of, send the whole part? Okay, so is that was your
The whole
intention?
part.
Yeah, okay,
So we're done?
for this, yeah.
Okay.
Good, thank you. Matters postponed at number 15. There's nothing that's been postponed. No motions for which notice was previously given. Addition, old business. Ms. Bloomfield, you're up.
Thank you, Your Worship. We are hosting an information session this Wednesday at 7 p.m. in room 220 at the Professional Center, respecting the voting process in the upcoming municipal election. Stephen Beamish from our service provider Dominion Voting will be leading the presentation. He is an excellent presenter and a wealth of knowledge. I encourage anyone interested in learning more about the municipal election to attend this event. Again, it takes place at 7 p.m. at the Professional Center this Wednesday. My next item has to do with the Grey County Compliance Audit Committee. We are still looking for applicants. Anyone interested in serving on this committee are encouraged to submit an application by September 7th to Heather Morrison, the Grey County Clerk. Information about the committee and the application form can be found on our website at owensoundvotes.ca.
Good, thank you. Councillor Kepke?
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I just want to comment very briefly on the AMO conference and workshops that I attended, and I'm only going to give one little snippet from each workshop that I attended as hopefully some inspiration. First one was Government in 2020, Innovation, the Future of Government, And a takeaway from that, municipalities need to do things differently in the world of technology. The most established organizations are the most vulnerable and unprepared for disruption. Perspectives of political environment, which was municipal electoral issues. The takeaway from that is preference is a council that has healthy debate and decides to put the debate behind them and work together. And I think we're very fortunate that we have a team that works that way. Next one was international trade. Municipal policies and international trade agreements are affected by financial assistance, procurement, public-private partnerships, and regulations. Next workshop was policy and platforms in municipal election campaigns. And from that, the takeaway is treat the dollars you spend in the municipality, know you are spending the taxpayers' dollars. Rural economic development strategies. There was a presentation on medicinal cannabis plants, New to Gray initiative, which I was very proud to see them on the stage. And then Berks Falls talked about their downtown community improvement plan. The next workshop was on community hubs, and there was someone there talking about the YMCA GTA Centers of Community, and there was an extremely enthusiastic individual there from Ashfield, Coburg, Wawanosh, who spoke about third space buildings and the closure of those, and the changing role of municipalities in those closures, being schools and churches. She suggested being proactive, not reactive, and help community groups where possible, show them the way to work on their own. And that's just a few things I attended at AMO and certainly was proud to be there.
Good, thank you. Councillor O'Leary?
Thank you, Your Worship. Always an educational experience to go to the AMO conference. Even the drive down, actually, I was driving all by myself with 4 other women telling me how to drive. That was the toughest part of the week. But the highlight for me at the conference was our meeting with the Minister of Labour, Laurie Scott. I thought both you, Your Worship, and Wayne Ritchie did a really good job on behalf of council, and I've sat in those meetings before with Minister Flynn, who was the Minister of Labour on when the Liberals were in power. And I never had the confidence leaving a meeting with Minister Flynn that I had with Laurie Scott. So I think it was a pretty encouraging meeting, and I think it was good that Dave Henderson from Brockville, the mayor of Brockville, joined us. They're in a similar situation, and I think we did a good job of double teaming them. So it was certainly a good week, for sure.
Thank you. I want to go back to Councillor Kapke.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did forget one item. September is Big Brothers Big Sisters Month, and their theme is Imagine Who They Will Become Because of You. And this is a campaign that they've got going, and they're working with the Owen Sound DAIA to organize Light Up Purple for the month of September with participating retailers downtown. So if you see a purple storefront, you'll know it's because they're recognizing the Big Brothers Big Sisters with their purple theme. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kapke, I'm going to put pressure on you here without any warning. One more thing I want you to tell me about is the DIA public meeting coming up Thursday.
Thank you, Your Worship. The DIA meeting is going to be held at the Bayshore here, August 30th at 5:30 p.m., and the discussion will be involving business-sponsored parking in the downtown. So changes to the parking in the downtown area and the lots on the streets, and the DIA, I believe, will be presenting a draft budget at that meeting as well.
So the goal is to have members of the DIA, businesses, and landlords at that meeting to discuss it? That's correct, and also the city will be making a presentation as well on reorganizing the DIA and the board remaining as an autonomous board. However, the management of that may change. So that will be presented. But it's all information that's being presented. Public meeting discussions? Yes. Yes, good. Okay, so that's Thursday, August 30th, here in this building in the Bayshore at 5:30. Correct. Good, thank you. Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will also try to keep my comments short from our recent visit to AMO. What I wanted to discuss on mine that I visited to was the session on the way to inclusive community building. Now, when we talk about being inclusive, this is not just what we normally would come through. It is about genders, it's about sexual orientation, it's about individuals with accessibility issues, it's about youth, it's about seniors. And it's more about how to make them all feel inclusive into a community. So we had 3 speakers on the subject. One was presented from Yolaine Curlew, which is the Deputy Mayor of Sioux Lookout, and she was representing the FCM, Diverse Voices for Change. Basically what she had gone through was that globally there's 23.4% our women are actually being presented or are sitting in national parliaments. So they were taking a look, and it was a case study from Sioux Lookout and multiple other cities across the province to find out why was that? Why was there such a low number of women involved in municipal politics and upper tiers? So one of the things that just came through with it was more about how you, some of the challenges, right? Maybe it's legislation, it's the timing of meetings, it's maybe just the culture and the ways of working at a city council. So they had kind of looked into finding some findings of how to change that, being more open with your policy creation, doing support seminars with individuals, putting an emphasis on some of the success stories of women in the community. So that was a really good one to hear from. Yolaine Curlew, she, like I said, she was the Deputy Mayor of Sioux Lookout. She is destined to be a lot further than Deputy Mayor of Sioux Lookout. She was amazing, just the way she carried her, it was absolutely amazing. The next one we looked into, or the next speaker was from the town of Ajax, about building inclusive communities. Same thing, was a lot of the things that they had discussed were about were promotions by policy. So Ajax is the fastest growing town in Durham region, so it does have a lot of influx with of a lot of new to becoming more inclusive. So one of the things they had discussed was working with your community partners to better engage residents and strengthen neighborhoods so that residents and businesses feel connected to their neighbors and feel a sense of ownership over the success of a thriving community. So one of the things that they had done to showcase their cultures was doing like a TED Talks. It was called Ajax Talks, and they'd come and every different organizations could come and have a briefing and discuss in a public setting about showcasing their culture, showcasing their whatever they were. So it could open up if you had someone with a disability issue, or if you had young individuals, or if you had seniors, or it opened up a platform to allow them to speak and allow the community to get behind them. Finally, the last one that spoke was from the London Youth Advisory Council. This one was absolutely amazing. Two young females who had gone through being an elected official in the London Youth Advisory Council are now part of being both staff members of it. One is the executive director, and the other one's the director of programming, I believe. Anyways, so they do elections basically the same way that we would do in a municipal government. There's 14 elected officials from 14 wards across London. They're between the ages of 15 to 25. And one of their biggest things is that you take into consideration youth not as just a consideration, but a collaboration. So they're trying to get their opinions out, get their voices heard about some of the issues that represent youth and some of their perspectives. So it could be economic development, it could be transit, it could be waste management, it could be culture. But it also educates youth about the impact that they can make on policy development. The program's funded through Trillium, so it's independent from the city, but they do have their own selected elections, and the executive director also helps them get everything along just the same way we have our senior management. So just a revolving door, what I heard when we were at Nick Nanos was, we want to get youth engaged, but they are engaged. It's just how you're engaging youth. So maybe try there in different ways. What's important to them? Is it transit? Is it green space? But youth are engaged. It just depends on what questions you're asking and how you're asking them. Anyways, that was my update from AMO. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Councillor Lemon.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the things, as we're all aware, that our emancipation picnics receiving a lot more recognition once again. And one of the things that I want to sort of put in people's heads. I'm not asking for any action because we couldn't make the deadline of September 1st. A provincial plaque at Harrison Park, considering this is the longest emancipation picnic anywhere, I think it would be appropriate for next year to, about May, start looking at obtaining a provincial plaque for Harrison Park and the island for the picnic, so that it receives recognition from tourists who look at historic venues to go to that are listed in the registry of the Ontario Heritage Trust, and that would give people one more reason to visit Owen Sound. We are applying for one for Cobble Beach for Bayfield's landing spot, because it is 200 years old next year.
Good, thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Your Worship. I don't think I can speak quite as quickly as Councillor Dodd did, but I'll give it a shot.
Kind of sounding like Bill Walker there, wasn't he?
Junior. The Bay Shore Race, Your Worship, I'd just like to give a shout out and my congratulations to the organizers and the more than 400 participants in the race who raised over $40,000 for the Hospital Foundation yesterday. A lot of people do know and a lot of people don't know that the province does not fund capital purchases at hospitals. All of that money is community-raised money to buy every single piece of equipment in the hospital. So it's a big deal, raising that much money, and a big shout-out to the organizers and the participants. AMO, I'll just keep it really, really brief. I mean, one of the great things that I learned there is a fact that I think I already knew, but it bears repeating. Out of every tax dollar collected in Canada, 9 cents goes to municipalities. That is a sobering figure. 9 cents of every tax dollar goes to municipalities, and look at all we're able to provide with that 9 cents. It'd sure be nice to have 10 or 11 cents. That's all I could say. Here's another great one that we learned. When questioned about several news items, real and fake, 17% of people believed the truth and 47% believed the lie. So when you think about what we're up against in terms of communicating for the public, that puts a bit of a spin on it. Another great thing that I thought was really positive for municipalities, a majority of people polled support adding 1% to the HST if that money comes directly to municipalities for infrastructure work. And that is something you can take to the bank. That's solid, and it's being worked on now, so I hope that that goes forward. I attended lots of sessions as well, one on innovative solutions for small-town Ontario, and the thrust of that was actually the sharing of municipal services and contracts. I thought I was going to get all sorts of ideas of fun things we could do, but it was services and contracts, and I'm going to pass on some of the info to staff because it was amazing, the savings some communities are finding when they work together. I attended a session on the municipal role in healthcare, and on the final day I had the fun session attending one called Cannabis in Communities, the Here and the Now. So I now know everything that you need to know about cannabis in communities. It was interesting, they had the representatives of 3 government ministries who are in charge of the project, and they talked a little bit about the new mail order system. Basically, you'll have to provide your ID and proof of age before you can order online. Once you've ordered online, you have to provide ID at the door to receive your package, and they will not be leaving packages at the door if you're not home. So that will solve a few problems. We also heard from the Association of Police Chiefs and a number of municipal representatives. The one I found most interesting, though, was the CAO of Greater Napanee, who presented on things that I hadn't thought about when it came to the legalization of pot, including the effect on bylaw enforcement and property standards, planning, zoning, and waste treatment. And he pointed out to us that in Colorado, the regulations treat marijuana waste as a hazardous product. and it has to be disposed of as a hazardous product. The other thing is wastewater created during the production and processing of marijuana is also considered a hazardous waste and has to be disposed of as a hazardous waste. So those were a couple of points that I certainly hadn't thought of in terms of the impact that legalization might have on our community. And there are certainly other things like health and safety implications for municipal staff and emergency services, and it just goes on and on. And again, I'll be sharing some of that information at various committees that I'm involved in. All in all, it was a great time, and I always feel if I learn one or two things that I didn't know before, it's definitely worthwhile. I just wanted to mention, Your Worship, that the Tom Thompson Art Gallery has revived its very popular Community Curators Program. So for the paltry sum of $125, you get to go in and explore the community, the permanent collection of the gallery. You can look at every single piece of art in there if you want to, and you get to choose a piece and be the curator of that piece in the Community Curators Collection, which opens on September 28th. So you will get a $100 tax receipt for that. All the money goes to support programs at the Tom, and the deadline for applying is September the 1st. And one last thing that all of the lovers of Antiques Roadshow, as we are at our house, will enjoy hearing about is Appraisal Day is back on September 22nd, September 22nd from 11 till 4. A representative of Bonham's International Appraisers and something other, the print is way too small for me to read, will be at the Tom, and you can bring down your precious items, and for a small fee, which is not written on here, you can have your item appraised. And who knows what we'll find in Owen Sound. I keep looking for Tom Thompson's at garage sales, but I haven't had any luck yet. And with that, Your Worship, I'm all finished.
Good, thank you. So you've covered off that session innovation that I was going to talk about. Councillor Larry's covered off the meeting with the minister. You've covered off the Bayshore race, which was really successful Sunday morning, and looking forward to the 10th next year, the same location. Salmon Spectacular is open. Congratulations to Scott, Chris, Fred, and everyone in the Sydenham Sportsmen. Clearly, I want to wish them success. It's great for our economy. It's a big social event, and the proceeds go to fish stocking and conservation efforts. A couple weeks ago, I guess everyone knows now, we welcomed BWXT and Brotec Precision, two manufacturers, into the old PPG plant, which provides jobs and assessment, and this is great, both suppliers to Bruce Power. Mr. Ritchie, have you got any updates on City Hall?
Certainly, Your Worship, I can tell you what Kristen Schreider, our manager of property, has learned. Most of the materials are either on site or very close to being on site. We are working very diligently with our architect and our general contractor to get the trades there this week to start installing some of these. We still have no real word on the interior doors, which probably at this point, Your Worship, is the one issue where we're most concerned to get in. We're working on backup plans to get partial doors. So work progresses. Staff continue to certainly try to keep the feet to the fire in the project, but the good news is most of the materials are on site.
Good, thank you. Discussion. Number 18, motion the committee rise.
Moved by myself that the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
All in favor? That is carried. Motion to adopt proceedings, Committee of the Whole.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor O'Leary, that the action taken in Committee of the Whole in considering public meetings, deputations, and presentations, public question period, matters arising from correspondence, reports of city staff, consent agenda, committee minutes, matters postponed, motions for which notice was previously given, and additional business be confirmed by this council.
All in favor? That is carried. Notices of motion, seeing none coming. Bylaws.
Through your worship, the bylaws listed for approval on tonight's agenda include the confirmatory bylaw, a bylaw to amend the board and committee bylaw for an appointment to the Accessibility Advisory Committee, bylaw to execute a site plan agreement with Ann Mott properties respecting property at 1025 8th Street East. A bylaw to execute a facility use agreement with Steve Brown and Dave McNeil respecting the Owen Sound Fall Classic Slow Pitch Tournament. A bylaw to execute a site plan agreement with McLean Engineering respecting property at 1006 Street East. Bylaw to execute an assignment of lease, consent to assignment of lease, and waiver of distraint respecting the Best Western Inn on the Bay and adjacent parking lot at 1800 2nd Avenue East.
Good, thank you.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor O'Leary, that bylaw numbers 2018-128, 129, 130, 131, 132, and 133 be passed and enacted.
And all in favor? And that is carried, so that completes our business for tonight. I've got 9:47. That was a pretty big meeting for information. Thanks, everybody.